brigade. Hal had brought his half-dozen seasoned men with him, but he soon discovered that the rest of the soldiers in his command were raw recruits from the Down Realms, men who scarcely knew how to cock a crossbow. They were as green as grass, with less than a week until they marched. Hal called his handful of veterans in and said, "Good news. You're all being promoted to lieutenant." They looked at each other, shuffling their feet, murmuring thank yous, waiting for the rest of it. "I'm going to split this battalion into 5 columns of 24. Each of you will take charge of a column. You'll march with them, eat with them, sleep with them, get to know who's who, and surface any talent you can. Until we engage, I want you to drill them hard. Focus on crossbow drills, the 5 standard orders, fighting formations, and the care of weapons. Once we engage, I want you to do everything you can to keep all of your scripts alive." "But, Captain—" Now Lieutenant Cousineau protested. "What about you? Who'll watch your back if—" "Do it," Hal said, and turned away. Once Hal's hurry-up boot camp began, his men were up at dawn, drilling every single day, while the other battalions slept in. Part of the mission was to undo the damage done to the recruits already. The newlings had been stuffed full of stories by the veterans, tales of the sorcerous land up north, of the Witch Queen and her terrifying twin daughters, who drank the blood of the faithful and rode saber-toothed horses naked through the skies, of the northern warrior they called the Grey Wolf, impossible to kill. He turned into a huge gray wolf when the battle fever took him, savaging any poor soldier unlucky enough to cross his path. Hal wasn't going to rule anything out, but he'd fought several campaigns in the north and had seen nothing of the sort. There were wolves in the mountains. Hal had seen and heard them. He reasoned that any wolf looks like a giant when he's bearing down on you, and grows considerably after in the telling. "The northern soldiers are just men," he told the men in his command. "And women," he amended. "When you cut them, they bleed, just like us." It was true that northern women fought as fiercely as the men, so fiercely that, on the battlefield, it was difficult to tell them apart. Several times in the past, Hal had discovered that the man he'd just killed was actually a woman. He just couldn't get used to that. Maybe that was the root of the rumors. It was easier to think you'd killed a witch or a ghost warrior than a woman. They left Spirit Gate a week after Hal's arrival. The countryside they marched through had been stripped of anything edible or useful. Many of the farms and villages had been destroyed and abandoned over the course of the war. And yet the Northerners kept on fighting, year after year. The church said it was because they'd been enslaved by their sorceress queen, and the true sons of Malthus would be welcomed as liberators. Hal was still waiting for that. They met little resistance, save the usual Copperhead hit-and-run attacks. Karn made no attempt to pursue, apparently considering the loss of a few soldiers here and there the price of making good time. Hal's battalion was still more likely to kill one of their fellow soldiers than to give the Northerners anything to worry about. It gave Hal plenty to worry about, though. They were young, too. Many had not yet got their growth. Some didn't even speak common. Hal set about to try to learn their names. Tai, Bakshi, Renault, Sky. The only veterans attached to his battalion, aside from the ones he'd brought himself, were 4 captive mages. One of them was a blade-faced man named Pitts. Every time his droop-lidded gaze brushed over Hal, it gave him the chills. The mages had little to say to Hal, despite his attempts to engage them. That wasn't unusual. Collared mages were often sullen, resentful of being ganged into the Southern Army. Hal usually got on well with them once he won them over, but that took time he didn't have. Hal couldn't help wondering why these men had been sent into the fighting so soon after recruitment, why they had been assigned to him, and why he and his were marching ahead of the veterans to the rear. He didn't know for sure, but he had some theories. They'd reached the eastern end of the pass before Hal managed to corner General Karn. "Sir, I've been evaluating the men assigned to my battalion, and I'm worried that their inexperience might endanger the brigade and interfere with the mission," Hal said, the words tumbling out quickly before he could be dismissed. "So you're worried, Captain Madelon," Karn said, planting his hands on his hips. "I hope it's not keeping you up nights. As you should know, we're dredging the bottom of the barrel when it comes to new recruits. You'll have to work with what you have, just like the rest of us." "Sir," Hal persisted, "I'm not complaining about the quality of the men under my command. I believe they can become good soldiers with time. I'm concerned about their youth, and—" "You're scarcely dry behind the ears yourself, and you've done all right," Karn said. "I've been fighting for the Empire since I was 11, Hal said. "What most concerns me is their lack of training and experience, coupled with their concentration in one unit. It seems to me that if they could be mingled with more experienced troops in all 3 battalions, they could learn from their comrades, and the veterans could help them survive until they develop some skills." "Are you questioning my orders, Captain?" "Yes," Hal thought. "I definitely am." "No, sir. I'm merely suggesting that—" "I need my veterans to fight, Captain, not to babysit new recruits," Karn said. "I've organized my battle plan to make the best use of all my assets. Everyone keeps telling me you're a brilliant field officer. That's why I put these scripts with you. You and your battalion will have an important job to do." "Which is?" "Your battalion will take the lead in the invasion of Queen Court Vale," Karn said. If it had been anyone else, Hal would have assumed he'd somehow misunderstood. But when he looked into Karn's face, when he saw the sneering triumph there, he knew that he'd heard right. "Could you elaborate, sir?" Hal said. Somehow he managed to keep his voice calm, steady, matter-of-fact. "You will fight your way through the pass," Karn said, as if Hal were too stupid to divine his true meaning. "Once through, you will clear the valley of civilians, loot the town of all valuables, and burn everything to the dirt." Karn paused, as if he expected a hearty thank you for this suicide assignment. Hal straightened, broadened his stance, and looked the general in the eye. "And after that?" he said evenly. For a long moment, Karn was at a loss. Hal knew he hadn't made a plan for after, because Hal and his battalion weren't supposed to survive. "After that, you'll await further orders," Karn said. "If I may ask, sir, what will the other 2 battalions be doing in the meantime?" "We will be right behind you," Karn said with a predator's smile, "sending replacements up as needed." The general paused long enough to let that sink in. "Now, Captain, you'd best get some rest." With that, Karn turned and walked away, not waiting for a salute. Which was good, because Hal was not about to give him one. His father's words came back to him. "Right now, it doesn't suit King Gerard for you to be a successful soldier." Hal added his own coda to that. "But it does suit him for you to be a dead one." He was boxed in. If he refused Karn's orders, he'd be court-martialed and executed. If he deserted, he'd be hunted down and executed. He could turn traitor and throw himself on the dubious mercy of the Witch Queen. Any of those options would disgrace his father and help build the king's case against him. If Hal walked off a cliff, would that be a virtuous death? What would happen to his battalion? Would Karn fold them into his other forces, or would they be sent out to slaughter on their own? Truth be told, Hal wanted to live, and he wanted to save as many in his battalion as he could. He was just beginning to learn their names. "Even if the job you're assigned is not to your liking, a Madelon will see it done." Hal considered his options. He had just a handful of mounted soldiers. The vast majority were infantry. But in the narrow pass, the terrain was a double-edged sword. It would protect his flanks, but it would also prevent him from using his numbers, which was the only card he had to play. His best hope was the element of surprise. He needed to get his battalion through the pass and into the open field before the Northerners could block their path. Then he could do with numbers what he couldn't do with talent and skill. "Sir!" he called after Karn. The general stiffened and turned. "Yes, Captain." "Permission to march now, sir." Karn blinked in surprise, eyed him suspiciously, then bared his teeth. "Captain," he said, "you can march whenever the hell you want." 4. Queen Court Vale. Lys's squadron met the army of Arden midway through the pass, where the steep shoulders of the mountains nearly touched, and the enemy had to file through 2 or 3 abreast. Lys and her soldiers stood directly in their path, a briar of swords, axes, spears, and magic. She sent her best archers, Shadow among them, scrambling up the hillside so they could shoot down from above. It was hard to tell how many of the enemy there were, since they were strung out in a line. It doesn't matter, Lys told herself, if we only have to face a few at a time. The mudbacks were known for their precision columns and formations, but this batch seemed just a bit ragged. Lys counted 4 slave mages to her squadron's 1 wizard. She could see them, their collars glittering in the noonday sun, just behind the enemy's front lines. Finn was kept busy on defense, raising shields against attack magic and pinning down enemy wizards who attempted to improve their firing position by climbing higher. That left him little opportunity to assist the Highlander offense, so it was up to the line soldiers of the salvo to make the Southerners pay a dear price for every bit of ground. And pay they did. The Southerners lost 3 soldiers for 1 of theirs, but the mudbacks kept coming, filling in the gaps created when one of them went down, bringing up more weapons and carrying away bodies. Lys imagined a long line of mudbacks reaching all the way to the coast. The only constants were the 4 mages and a young officer with raven hair who seemed to be everywhere, riding his dun-colored horse up and down, correcting their formation, ordering replacements forward, and shouting encouragement. At one point, Lys saw him lean down from his horse and scoop up a soldier who was staggering around aimlessly, blood pouring from a head wound. He carried him to the rear, then immediately returned to the front, his tunic now soaked with blood. As the afternoon wore on, the cacophony around Lys seemed to recede to a dull roar as she focused on the enemy in front of her. Her sword grew heavy in her hands, and her shoulders ached. They seemed to be at an impasse as the killing continued, with neither side making forward progress. Healers came and went, carrying the wounded and dead away. Lys shouted encouragement to her weary soldiers, sending some to the rear and bringing up fresher fighters from the other squadrons. Only Lys, Finn, Shadow, Sasha, and Cam stayed on the front line. She tried to shut down the voice in her head that said that her side would run out of soldiers and weapons eventually, and then they would be overrun. "Look out, Lieutenant!" Cam slammed his horse into hers so that she all but lost her seat. The incoming arrow passed harmlessly over her shoulder, but she heard someone scream when it found a mark to the rear. "Mander's down!" Shadow shouted from his vantage point atop the hill. Lys turned and looked, but couldn't see Finn. If Finn is down, his shields are down, Lys thought. Once their mages figure that out, we're all sitting ducks. Sasha had reached the same conclusion, because she angled her horse between Lys and the Ardenine mages, shouting, "Go, Lys! Get out of here now!" Lys wheeled her horse so she faced the enemy and saw all 4 of them, right arms extended, left hands on their amulets, preparing to fire. At this distance, there was no way they would miss. Lys wore her father's clan talisman, which provided protection against a direct hit of attack magic. As far as she knew, she was the only one on the field with one. But Mincemeat was unprotected, and they'd both go down if the mages were smart enough to target him. The mages hadn't seemed to notice her yet. In fact, they seemed distracted, aiming off to one side. Well then, Lys thought. "For the Queen in the north!" she cried, spurring her horse forward. Behind her, she heard Sasha and Cam shouting at her, then the rattle of hooves as they followed. The mages never saw her coming. Mincemeat crashed into the nearest mage, sending him flying. He landed flat on his back, nearly under her pony's hooves. Leaning low out of the saddle, Lys finished him with a sweep of her axe, then ducked as a mudback aimed a blow at her skull. She could feel the buzz as bolt after bolt of attack magic sizzled into her talisman. And then, blessedly, the bolts stopped coming. Lys looked around and saw that Sasha and Cam had done for 2 more of the mages, but the last one had retreated behind a wall of mudbacks and was lobbing flame and attack charms over their heads. As she watched, one of his bolts all but hit the young Ardenine officer. That was when she realized this mage wasn't aiming at her at all. He was aiming at his own commander. Sasha scooped up a mudback by his scruff and breeches and used him as a shield as she spurred her pony into the line of Southerners. The line broke, opening a path to the 4th mage. Lys's first arrow bounced off his silver collar, but her second found a home, and he toppled backward. 4 mages down, Lys thought, but her cheer faded when she looked around and saw nothing but a sea of mudbacks around her, and the young officer facing her, his crossbow aimed at her heart. 5. The Grey Wolf. Despite Hal's forced march through the pass, the Northerners met them before they'd reached the vale. They made their stand at the narrowest part of the pass. Their archers had positioned themselves on the heights, where they could direct withering fire onto his men as soon as they appeared. As planned, his veterans split up, each taking charge of a column. 6 officers who know what they're doing can accomplish a lot more than one. It also allowed Hal to keep one eye on the shape of the battle and the other on his mages. Clearly the Northerners had at least one mage on hand, because he was busily putting up barriers to deflect their attempts to clear off the bowmen. Hal searched the enemy lines until he spotted him, a young man whose pale hair made him a good target. Hal's own mages were veterans, so they should have known what to do on their own. Yet they wove magical barriers around themselves, but initiated no offense. "Pitts!" Hal shouted, pointing. "It's 4 against 1. Can you do anything about their mage?" Pitts complied like a man half asleep. "A gold crown to whoever can take out their mage!" Hal called out to his own bowmen. They did their best, though they could have benefited from a few more years of drilling. Once they'd launched their bolts, it seemed to take them forever to reload. The Northerners, on the other hand, used longbows, and they were excellent shots. Their front-line soldiers fought as fiercely as any he'd seen. Though their numbers were fewer, each well-trained Northern soldier was worth 4 of Hal's men. They are fighting on their home ground, Hal thought, and it shows. As the battle dragged on, Hal was losing 2 or 3 soldiers to every one of theirs. Soon the Empire's advantage in numbers would evaporate. When he looked to the rear, the other 2 battalions were nowhere in sight. "I've been set up for failure," he thought, as his losses mounted. "But I won't fail. I need to find a way to win." Hal looked for the Felsian field commander and eventually spotted him, wearing a yellow lieutenant's scarf mounted on a smoky gray pony. As the lieutenant rode up and down the line, 2 other soldiers moved in tandem with him, as if they were linked by an invisible tether. He has a personal guard, too, Hal thought, surprised. The guards, if that's what they were, had their work cut out for them. The lieutenant wasn't afraid to wade in himself. It was like he had eyes in the back of his head. If I could eliminate their commander, Hal thought, it might give us a fighting chance. "Pitts!" Hal shouted. Target their field officer, he pointed. Pitts looked, then shook his head, making the sign of Malthus. Won't do any good, he said. That's the Grey Wolf. Hal heard a murmur go through the troops like a collective shudder. The Grey Wolf! It's the Grey Wolf! Hal looked again. Granted, the lieutenant was a distance away, but Hal didn't see anything wolfish about him. What makes you think it's him? I've seen him before, in the borderlands, and in the fens. He always fights with 2 guards at his side. He's a demon. If you try to kill him, he turns into a wolf. Hal struggled to be patient. You've seen this with your own eyes? Pitts shook his head. Nobody's seen it and lived to tell about it. Hal could sense panic rising all around him like a flood tide. He needed to put a stop to it. I don't know about you, Hal said, but I'd rather face a wolf than a demon. He urged his horse forward, closing the distance between them as much as he dared. Unslinging his bow from his shoulder, he reached into his saddle boot, drew out an arrow, nocked it, and let fly. Hal was not the best bowman in the king's army, but at that distance he might have hit his mark, had the Grey Wolf's guardian not shoved the lieutenant aside so that the arrow flew harmlessly over one shoulder. Hoping for a second shot, Hal wheeled his horse. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw Pitts, his hand on his amulet, loose a torrent of flame straight at him. It struck his gelding dead on. The horse screamed and went down, but Hal had already leapt free. He landed, rolling to his feet in time to see another one of his mages taking his own shot at him. That missed too, but Hal knew that his luck couldn't hold forever. Hal ran a zigzag toward them, sending up a prayer, all the while knowing there was no way he could get to all of them before one of them got lucky. He imagined the message his father and Lady Mother would receive, that he'd been killed in a losing battle. Would his father suspect the truth? His prayers were answered in an odd sort of way when 3 spatterbacks plowed into the mages, sending them flying. It was the Grey Wolf and his 2 guardians. Hal stood frozen, watching them make quick work of 3 of the mages, but Pitts retreated a short distance away, set his feet, and slammed bolt after bolt of flame into the officer he called the Grey Wolf. The lieutenant did not turn into a wolf. In fact, he scarcely seemed to notice. Did that mean that Pitts was right, that the Felsian officer was some kind of witch or demon? With that, Pitts must have spotted Hal, because he shot a torrent of flame straight at him, nearly incinerating him. That broke into Hal's trance, stirring him to action. He ripped a bow and packet of arrows from the grip of a dead soldier, mounted a riderless horse, and charged toward Pitts just in time to see the mage go down, an arrow transfixing his chest. Hal wheeled, knocking an arrow, and found himself face to face with the lieutenant who'd just taken the shot. Hal understood several things in rapid succession. First, demon or not, this enemy officer had withstood a torrent of magical attacks with no apparent damage. Second, the lieutenant was a woman. Though she was tall as many men were, her features were unmistakably feminine, and her long hair was woven into a thick braid the color of autumn wheat. Her skin was darker than that of many northerners, her brown eyes as fierce and proud as any raptor's. Third, she and her companions had just saved his life by killing 4 mages who were supposed to be on his side. Fourth, all he had to do was let fly, and the so-called Grey Wolf would be done for, assuming arrows worked better on her than magery. But he couldn't. For what seemed like an eternity, they sat on their horses, staring at each other. 2 soldiers on opposite sides, each trying to survive. Hal realized that he had a lot more in common with this fierce lieutenant than with the thrice-damned king of Arden, and he owed more to the men under his command, who had fought so fiercely in the service of a man who had betrayed them. Hal lowered his bow. The battle is lost anyway, he told himself. Those dead mages were the only edge we had. The lieutenant grinned, her eyes crinkling in amusement. "Better watch your back, Flatlander," she said. She turned her pony and galloped back to the safety of her forward line. With that, Hal called the retreat, hoping that his decimated troops still remembered that command. 6. After the dance. Lys walked the now quiet battlefield with General Dunedain, Shadow Dancer, Mason, and Littlefield. Darkness was falling. As the sun descended in the west, the Spirit Mountain sent long shadow fingers across Queen Court Vale, reaching for Alyssa Peak. The dead from both armies were still being carried from the field. In the surrounding hills, funeral pyres were burning, smudging the face of the rising moon. One of them burned for Captain Starborn, who'd died doing what he loved best, killing Southerners. Even the usually impassive Dunedain wept when she heard the news. This was a loss they could ill afford. Even when we win, we lose, Lys thought. Most of the Queendom's dead and wounded were from Lys's own squadron. She'd fought with some of them since the summer she'd turned 12, just a year after Arden stole her father and brother from her. A battle is like a deadly sort of dance, Lys thought. We learn the steps by sparring in the practice yards, by marching up and down the field in the hope that we'll remember the moves when we're distracted by the smell of blood and the shrieks of the wounded and death howling toward us from all sides. We go into battle to the cadence of drums and guns, but our dance cards are blank. We have no idea who we'll dance with that day, when death might cut in, and who will leave the floor alive. Officers attempt to call the steps, but after a certain point, nobody is listening. It all comes down to what happens in each of dozens of intimate meetings, advances and retreats, moves and counter-moves. As an officer, Lys had tried to manage the field, but, like any other soldier, if her time came, she would die alone. The wounded had long since been delivered to the healers in the town. Among the wounded was Finn, who'd suffered a blow to the head. Lys had already been to the healing halls, where she'd spoken to all who were well enough for visitors. Finn refused to see anyone, which was one more worry. He shouldn't have gone back into battle so soon, Lys thought. No wonder he wants to serve the Queendom a different way. Still, the healers said that Finn would recover, and that was something to be grateful for. The story of the charge against the Southern mages had spread like wildfire, adding more glitter bits as it traveled. Soon it would be an entire battalion of mages led by the King of Arden himself. The only thing Lys liked about that version of the story was the thought of having Gerard within bowshot. Lost in a muddle of thought, Lys trailed after the others. On the one hand, they had won an important victory against what had appeared to be impossible odds. On the other hand, she now knew that a good part of the battalion they'd faced was as young and green as the grass along the Durnwater in June. Untrained, untried, untested on the battlefield, lucky to know which end of a sword to poke with. Yet they'd been sent into the van with their young captain, like sheep to a slaughter, while Karn's more seasoned troops melted away. And a slaughter it was. The enemy losses were extraordinarily high compared to their own. The difference between us and them is that the King of Arden doesn't care. If they were sheep, the mudback captain was the sheepdog, by turns leading them into the fray, turning them away from danger, snapping at their heels, calling them to order when they fell apart. She could see the bones of his tactics. He'd done what she would have done in his place, fashioned a simple attack strategy in the hope that they could carry it out. He'd done the best he could with a bad situation. And then, in the end, he was betrayed. Sasha and Cam said she must be mistaken, but Lys knew what she'd seen, and what she'd seen was 4 mages turning on their commander, gunning for him instead of the enemy on the field. And that same commander standing down when he had the chance to put an arrow in her throat. Why would Karn lead with these younglings? And why wouldn't he relieve them when they needed it? Didn't he care whether he won this battle or not? More importantly, where was Karn now? Was it all some sort of distraction or decoy? A red herring? Was Karn teaching someone a lesson? Were the mages rising up against their southern handlers? There was a story there. Lys knew there was a story, but she would probably never hear it. All in all, it was a hollow sort of victory. "Lieutenant Grey?" Startled, Lys looked up to find herself the center of attention. "Wherever you were, I hope it was a pleasant journey," General Dunedain said. "Oh, no, not exactly," Lys said. "It's just that, after a battle, there's a lot to think about." "I agree," Dunedain said. "I've been thinking too." She held out her hand. "Give me your scarf." Lys, confused, blinked at the general. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't understand." "Your scarf, Lieutenant," Dunedain repeated impatiently. Patience was not the general's strong suit. Lys reached up and fingered the yellow scarf around her neck. Her battle-weary mind stumbled around, unable to hit on an explanation. "I know it needs washing, but—" "It doesn't need washing," Dunedain said. "It needs replacing. Now give it here." Was she being demoted? Booted out? Lys managed to undo the knot, slipped the scarf off, and handed it to Dunedain. The general tucked it into her carry-bag and pulled a wad of fabric from her pocket. She thrust it at Lys. "Here's a new one." It was blue. Captain's blue. "I know you don't stand on ceremony, Captain Grey," Dunedain said, grinning. "So you won't be disappointed by a field promotion. The salvo needs a new commander, and I've chosen you." Lys stood clutching it. "But Littlefield and Mason, they've got a lot more experience than I have, and—" "I don't want the job," Littlefield said. "Blue clashes with my eyes." "And I can't count high enough to be a captain," Mason said. Shadow took the scarf from Lys and knotted it around her neck. "It's you, Captain Grey. Deal with it. And when we get to town, you're buying." "You're the one getting married," Lys said. "You're buying." "I'm buying on my wedding day," Shadow said. "You'll have to wait until then." And then they were all laughing and embracing, and making the kinds of threats and promises that comrades make when one battle is over and the next not yet begun. They'd just reached their horses when they heard a pounding of hooves and saw the silhouette of a rider against the night sky. He reined in next to them, saluted General Dunedain, and handed her a dispatch tube. "We had a bird from Fortress Rocks, ma'am," he said. His expression said it was bad news. Fortress Rocks. Lys glanced at Shadow. His betrothed, Aspen, lived at Fortress Rocks. Dunedain weighed the tube, unopened in her hand. "And, while we were occupied in the pass, Khan took the rest of his brigade north." The soldier swallowed hard. "It's bad, Mom. The town's destroyed. They burned everything that was burnable, stole everything that was stealable, and blew up the keep. They slaughtered everyone." Lys's heart sank. Fortress Rocks was a beloved symbol of northern resistance. It had never fallen to a foreign invader, not even during the Wizard Wars. Until now. Shadow had gone dark and still, in the way only an uplander can. "Civilians? They killed civilians?" The soldier nodded. "It was nearly all civilians," he said. "Since it's far from the border,
There's only a handful of soldiers stationed there as a rule. I guess they figured it was an easy mark. What about survivors? Shadow persisted. The soldier shook his head. I don't know. Dunedain pulled the paper from the tube, scanned the message, and swore. May I see it? Shadow stuck out his hand. Dunedain didn't want to hand it over, Lys could tell, but she did. Shadow read it twice, then handed it back. He looked like he'd been gutted, yet was somehow still on his feet. Lys took a step toward him and put her hand on his arm, but he shook her off. This brigade of Khans, he said to the messenger, his voice icy and flat. Do we know where they are now? We thought they might go straight on to Top Cliffs, but it appears they've turned back south, hot-footing it back to Spirit Gate. By now, they've likely met up with what's left of them that we fought. There's no way we'll catch them now. If they are in the Seven Realms, I'll find them, Shadow said. Lys knew in her bones that Aspen was dead. That was bad enough. But somehow she had to prevent her friend from throwing his life away, too. She gripped his shoulder. Shadow, please. Let's ride to Fortress Rocks, she said. There may be people there who need our help. That's what's important now. He just stood there and looked at her, his face as expressionless as any granite face of Hanalea Peak, his eyes black and opaque as twin caves. Please, Shadow. The bastards will still be there when we go hunting them. That had the force of truth. Evil always seemed to flourish, while the good die young. After a long pause, Shadow nodded. All right, he said. Let's go. 7. Back in the cauldron. Lys and her party began the long descent from the eastern mountains, following the valley of the Durnwater down into the Vale. It had been nearly 3 months since Queen Court and Fortress Rocks, events Lys needed to remember and learn from. Now, November snow was already piling up in the high passes. It was late to be going home. It had been a long and bloody marching season. The scene at Fortress Rocks had been even worse than Lys had imagined. The slain totaled close to 600, including Aspen Silverleaf, who'd gone down in the street with her knife in hand and 2 dead mudbacks to show for it. The Ardenines had put everyone to the sword. Adults, litlings, even the livestock. Lys's salvo spent days clearing away rubble and constructing the funeral pyres that burned on for days. They were writing the epitaph to hundreds of sad stories. In most cases, Lys and her soldiers were the only mourners. There was no one else left alive. Finn had insisted on riding along to see if he could help with the wounded, but there were very, very few. He seemed to be recovering from his injury, though he still had little to say. There was one bit of good news. Aspen's younger siblings were not among the dead. They'd been staying with family at Marisa Pine's camp, so that Aspen could catch up on her orders. They returned to find their eldest sister dead and their home in ruins. The only other survivors were a few townspeople who had managed to flee into the surrounding hills or hide from the soldiers until they marched away. Lys, Shadow, and Dunedain questioned them, collecting details, assembling timelines, as if this would somehow prevent it from happening again. The only way to prevent this from happening again is to win this war, Lys thought, and we are not winning. Lys kept thinking about the young captain, leading his soldiers to slaughter in the pass, while farther north his comrades were slaughtering civilians. How much did he know about the plan of attack? Was he a willing or unwilling participant? A dupe or a co-conspirator? Was that why his own mages had turned on him? Was it because they knew they were being sacrificed? It doesn't matter, she told herself. Then why did she keep dwelling on it? They laid Aspen to rest in an embroidered deerskin robe made by her own hands. Shadow put her awl and needle in one hand, her dagger in the other. A pile of furs and deerskins at her feet. He held on to her hand until the rising flames forced him to let go. Lys released a breath of relief when he did. She'd been afraid he might choose to burn with her. They spent their remaining time at Fortress Rocks, rebuilding the temple and enough dwellings to house those few who remained. When Lys's salvo received marching orders, Shadow stayed behind to help rebuild Aspen's shop. Her younger sister, Sparrow, was determined to take it over and make a living for what was left of the family. Their grandmother came from Marisa Pines to help. Lys and her salvo had spent the rest of the autumn skirmishing with the enemy at Spirit Gate and along the southeastern border, accomplishing nothing. Now they were going home. Most of her salvo had gone ahead of them. Lys, Sasha, Cam, Finn, and Littlefield had detoured and collected Shadow at Fortress Rocks. They rounded the flank of the mountain, and Lys found herself looking down into the home vale. In wintertime, it was like looking down into a sea of cloud formed when the steam from the hot springs and geysers met the cold mountain air. Her father used to call it the cauldron. Lys couldn't help thinking that wasn't too far from the truth. As they descended, the air grew noticeably warmer, thanks to the heat that seethed beneath the ground and leaked out in places. The moist air formed layers of ice on cliffs and trees, producing a glittering fairyland when the sunlight hit it. It still snowed in the vale when the witch wind blew down over Hanalea and dumped its blizzards into the valley, but there were glens and niches that remained green all year long. Dusk was falling when they finally penetrated the last layer of cloud, and Lys saw the city spread before them, prickling with temple spires. The lamplighters were already moving along the streets, young wizards who spun spheres of light between their hands and lifted them to the tops of the lampposts. Crowds of children trailed behind, hoping the lamplighters would play catch with them before they moved on, the wizard lights streaking through the darkness. Sometimes the lighters would lift the litlings on their shoulders and allow them to grasp the brilliance between their hands and set the lights themselves. Even now, in wartime, with so many losses, some traditions continued. Light spilled from doorways into the dusk. Lys heard the faint sound of music as the last of the shops closed up and the inns and music halls opened their doors. People filled the streets, moving from work to play, going home to their families, or meeting lovers and friends. Once, Lys would have been among them. As a child, she'd loved walking the familiar streets of Southbridge and Ragmarket with her father, cloaked in anonymity, visiting the markets and attending music programs in the temples. Letting the music lift her and take her away. Not anymore. Maybe it was the gathering dark that meant it was the beginning of the month-long solstice season. This time of year always brought with it memories of past grief and apprehension about the future. Solstice would be forever tainted by the deaths of those she loved, as the monstrous king of Arden no doubt intended. Once their horses realized where they were going, their steps quickened, and it was more a matter of reining them in than of urging them forward. Mincemeat tried to take the bit in his teeth and forge ahead. Everyone's glad to be going home but me, Lys thought. She looked up at Shadow riding just ahead of her, shoulders still rounded from grief. Almost everyone. Lys's 16th name day hurtled toward her, bringing with it her coronation as the princess heir and her launch into the marriage market. Lys had a few memories of her sister Hannah's naming party in the optimistic past. Lys's father had danced with her, his serpent amulet glittering at his neck, a proud grin on his face. "Did you know that I hired your mother to teach me how to dance?" he'd said, leaning close to speak into her ear. "What?" Lys had frowned at him, convinced he was teasing her. "It's true. I swear on the dead queens," her father had said. "It was the only way I could think of to get her to dance with me."
"Well," Lys observed, "she did a fair job, I suppose." Her father had come out of the slums of Fellsmarch, a charismatic street lord whose silver cuff signified a magical legacy. He had become the Queen's bodyguard, then a member of the Wizard Council, and finally High Wizard and consort to the Queen. Never a king. He'd never wanted to be king. What he wanted was the Queen, and he'd paid a heavy price. We're a lot alike, Lys thought. He didn't want to be king, and I'm not so keen on being queen. If Hannah still lived, Lys's naming would have signified nothing more than a milestone, a festive party that signaled her entry into a career. Once she'd thought to be a musician or a poet. Now she'd probably choose a military career. As it was, more and more, she'd be pulled from the battlefield, where at least she knew what she was doing. Lys inhaled the mingled scents of Fellsmarch, flowers of all kinds, and the little charcoal burners the street vendors used to grill the sausages and flying fishes that they wrapped into flatbreads. The lights from the carousel sparkled out on the green like raindrops on a window pane, blurred by the tears in her eyes. Her father had brought it in pieces through the mountains and ordered it reassembled so all the litlings in the city could ride flying horses too. 4 years, she thought. 4 years since the last attack on the royal family. Did it mean that King Gerard had turned to other targets? Or did it mean they were due? "Captain," Sasha urged her pony up beside Mincemeat. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Lys lied. "The smoke burns my eyes is all." "It does that every time you come home," Sasha said with a sympathetic smile. "Nothing that a meat pie and a pint won't cure." "Have I ever told you that I love you, Talbot?" Lys said. Sasha snorted. "Me? I'm happy to be home. I can't wait to see my nieces and dig into some solstice cakes." "I can't wait to dig into some hot wassail," Littlefield said. Lys glanced over at Finn, who seemed lost in his own thoughts. "Finn, what are you looking forward to? Will you be working in the healing halls right away?" The question seemed to take him by surprise. "Oh, I'll look forward to seeing people I haven't seen for a while," he said. "And I'll begin working with Lord Vega as soon as I'm needed." "I hope you'll take a little time off, Finn," Lys said. "After everything that—" "I'm fine," Finn snapped. "Why won't anyone believe me?" "Easy, Sulmander," Shadow said. "What about you, Shadow?" Sasha said, then clamped her mouth shut as if sorry she'd asked the question. "I won't be home long," he said. "I'll stay a few days and see my father, but then I'm going back east." "What?" Lys had startled. She'd been counting on spending time with her friend while they were both in the capital. She wasn't good with matters of the heart, but she still hoped she could find a way to help him the way Adrian had helped her after Hannah died. "You won't be home for solstice?" He shook his head. "Are you going back to Fortress Rocks?" "I plan to make a stop there and drop off some more supplies to Sparrow, but I have business on the coast in a week. I'll be working at Demon Eye Camp through the spring, so there's not much point in traveling all the way back for the holiday." "Yes, there is," Lys said, thinking fast. She didn't believe that story about business on the coast. If he was traveling east, it might mean he planned to follow through on his promise to go after Marin Karn. Shadow had always danced on the edge, but now there was a recklessness about him that she'd not seen before. Worry squirmed in her middle, the worry that he would never come back. She groped for a way to keep him in the Vale, or bring him back for the Festival of Light at least. But
I was counting on going hunting together to put some meat on the table for the holiday. If I have to eat barley all winter, I'll cut my throat."
"You're a better hunter than I will ever be," Shadow said. "You'll do better on your own."
"No, I won't," Lys said. "Anyway, you can't fight this war every minute of every day."
"Hang on," Sasha said, staring at Lys. "What did you just say? I think something's gone wrong with my ears."
"Shut it, Talbot,"
Lys growled, her mind still churning, trying to surface an excuse to convince Shadow to stay.
"The thing is, there's something else I need your help with."
Shadow's eyes narrowed.
"Something else?" "Right," she said. "Something else."
"Like?" Before Shadow's name day, when he took up flashcraft, music had been a connection between them, and central to his existence. She could use that.
"Remember how we used to take music lessons together at Southbridge Temple? And how you were always better than me?"
"Barely," Shadow said, as if he thought he might be walking into a trap. "That was a long time ago."
"So, you know how Speaker Jemson holds that benefit for the Briar Rose Foundation every winter solstice?"
"Yes," Shadow said, scrubbing his hand through his curls. "So?"
"I promised Jemson that the two of us would do a set for the 25th anniversary of the Briar Rose Ministry."
"No."
"But I promised."
"You promised. I didn't," Shadow said. "It's been forever since I've picked up a bazilka."
"That's something you never forget,"
Lys said with false confidence. When Shadow kept shaking his head, she rushed on.
"If you'd seen Jemson's face, there'd be no way you could say no. He was so excited. You know how sentimental he is about his former students, and you know the ministry is more important than ever these days. So many people are going hungry during the holiday."
"All the more reason to focus on the war," Shadow said. "You don't need me. You're the one that will draw the crowds. You're a war hero and the heir to the throne. Who could resist?" It was down to begging. Lys leaned out of her saddle, gripped both his hands, and looked him in the eyes.
"Please, Shadow," she said, "don't make me get up there alone. I would rather face 100 howling Southern mercenaries than a temple crowd."
Shadow laughed, a rare and precious sound these days. "I do believe you would," he said. "All right, I'll do it, but I won't be back until just before the holiday. Let me know what pieces you want to play, and I'll try to get in some practice while I'm gone."
"Thank you," she said. "I owe you. I can't wait to tell Jemson."
She watched Shadow wheel his horse and ride away, thinking Jemson would likely be the most surprised of all. Littlefield, Mason, and the remaining Highlanders peeled off as they entered the city, heading for the garrison house. Lys, Sasha, Cam, and Finn continued on, making for the castle close and the tower of Fellsmarch Castle poking above everything else.
"Will you be staying in town?"
Lys asked Finn, hoping that was a safe question. She'd expected that Finn would break away and go directly to his family's compound on Grey Lady Peak. "I'll be staying in the palace," he said. "The Princess Melanie has arranged housing for my family over the holiday."
"Really?"
Lys said, surprised.
"Aunt Melanie did? Does that mean I'll be seeing more of you than usual?"
"Yes," he said. "You will.
As long as you're in town, you can come dine with us on the holiday," she said impulsively.
"That's the plan," he said. Looking over her shoulder, he added, "Here comes the Queen."
Lys turned to find her mother crossing the stable yard, Captain Byrne at her heels, Lys's Aunt Melanie and Cousin Juliana following close behind. "Look," Lys said, pointing at Lord and Lady Mander bringing up the rear. "Your parents are here, too."
Finn nodded, shifting his shoulders. He didn't seem surprised. Lys opened her arms and pulled her mother close. As usual, Lys felt like an awkward blonde giant.
"Thank the Maker you're home safe," Queen Resa said, tears shimmering in her eyes. She tolerated Lys's battlefield adventures because they were part of the role of a Grey Wolf queen, the only part Lys had enthusiastically embraced, a little too enthusiastically, as far as the queen was concerned. "How long have you been home from the borderlands?" Lys asked, holding her mother out at arm's length. "Just a week," her mother said. "I'll want to hear all about the campaign in the East." "It's always the same story, Mama," Lys thought. "They march north, we kill some of them, they kill some of us, and then they march south again." Out of the corner of her eye, Lys saw Lady Manders sweep Finn into her arms, embracing him with more enthusiasm than Lys had ever seen her display about anything. His father kept slapping his back and murmuring into his ear. When that trio finally broke up, Aunt Melanie greeted Finn, beaming as if he were her long-lost son. Then it was Juliana's turn. If anything, her greeting was warmer than her mother's. Everyone's sure glad to have Finn home, Lys thought. Not that they shouldn't be, but it was all just a little overdone, like a play in its first run-through. Eventually, the love fest was over. The Manders walked off together, Lord Mander with his arm around Finn's shoulders. That was when Aunt Melanie noticed Lys. "Welcome home, Alyssa," she said, warmly embracing her. "Juliana and I have been looking for you every day." As soon as Aunt Melanie released her, Juliana gripped both her hands. "Lys, I never feel the marching season is really over until you're home safe." "You're looking well," Lys said, because it was true. Her cousin's eyes were shining, and her cheeks were pinked up from the cold, or excitement, or maybe that's just the way they were. "We have so much to talk about. Aunt Resa and I have been discussing ways to prevent another Fortress Rocks, and we wanted to get your insights." "Good idea," Lys said. She couldn't help noticing that her cousin's hands were soft, the nails clean and manicured. It made Lys hyper-conscious of her own hands, calloused and cracked and dirt-stained. Taking a step back, her cousin looked up at her. "You always have so much more color in autumn than you do when you leave in the spring," she said. "Actually, it's dirt," Lys said. "We've discovered that a thick layer of dirt is great camouflage. In fact, out in the field, a good scrubbing could cost you your life." Juliana, brow furrowed, gazed at Lys. "Really?" she said finally, as if she didn't believe it, but was afraid to call her on it. "That's not all," Lys said, some devil inside her driving her on. "Mud, it turns out, is an excellent treatment for the complexion. I've brought a supply home so that I can apply it on a regular basis here at court." At that point, her mother caught her eye, scowled, and shook her head slightly. Juliana pretended not to notice. Lys couldn't say why she was so thin-skinned when it came to her cousin. Was she jealous that Juliana was built like a princess and not a lodgepole pine? Or was it that Juliana had all the traits Lys lacked? Social skills, diplomacy, political smarts, and breasts? Was it because her cousin was one of her mother's trusted advisers, though she was only 2 years older than Lys? Juliana had become an expert in foreign relations and had recently assumed responsibility for the Queendom's intelligence service. It had been floundering since Lady Tyburn was murdered. Strange. Lys couldn't remember Aunt Melanie ever showing the least bit of interest in politics. Juliana took to statecraft like a pig to mud, demonstrating the kind of clever, quick wit required to navigate agendas at court. It seemed like Lys had spent a lifetime hearing Juliana gently correct her in meetings. "Well, the fact of the matter is," she would say, tapping her long fingers on the reports in front of her. Or, "I can see why you might think that, Your Highness, but—" Or, "Our latest intelligence actually suggests that—"
Liz could only conclude that her cousin had inherited that interest and talent from her dead father. However she'd come by it, it seemed like Juliana and the Queen could finish each other's sentences without a hitch. Good for her, Liz thought. I wouldn't want to waste the marching season in one meeting after another. "Congratulations on the victory at Queen Court, Your Highness," Captain Byrne said. Immediately followed by the massacre at Fortress Rocks, Liz thought. Din says you're the most ferocious woman he knows, Juliana added. Ferocious? That was a compliment of sorts, but it wasn't exactly what Liz was going for. Juliana and I have been following your accomplishments, Aunt Melanie said. They are the talk of the court. Imagine downing 4 slave mages with one swipe of your sword. That's not exactly how it happened, Liz said. The ambassador from the Fens tells me that Lord Dimitri is ready to adopt you, Juliana said, or at least marry you off to 2 or 3 of his sons. I'm not marrying anyone, Liz snapped. And then, taking a deep breath, she added more graciously, Anyway, Lord Dimitri is too generous. All the credit for our success in the West should go to the Water Walkers. I'm just glad they're on our side. Perhaps we should send some of them to our southern borders, her mother said with a wry smile. Perhaps we should send them beyond our southern borders, Liz said. She looked at her mother, and her mother looked back, each knowing what the other was thinking, their ongoing disagreement about tactics hanging heavy between them. Let's not get into an argument before the sun has set on my first day home, Liz thought, especially not in front of Melanie and Juliana. I'd better see to mincemeat, she said, stroking the pony's nose. Dinner's at 7, her mother said. Juliana and your Aunt Melanie will be there too. I can't wait to catch up. 8. Sparring Lessons. Heads up, Liz! Liz gritted her teeth and raised the tip of her sword to counter Sasha's swing. When their blades met, the force of the blow all but rattled the teeth from her head. Her ears were ringing from the clamor of steel on steel, and her arms were so tired she could barely lift her sword. The cold wind somehow found its way into the practice yard and dried the sweat from her face as soon as it appeared, but her clothing was soaked through. When the bells from the cathedral tower signaled time, she fell forward onto her face in the snow. They were usually fairly evenly matched, height-wise at least, though Sasha had about 50 pounds on her. But Liz couldn't remember ever being worked this hard. Blood and bones, Liz muttered, scrubbing snow over her face. Tell me, Talbot, is it something I said? If so, I'm very, very sorry. Special request from your salvo, Sasha said, extending her hand to help her up. They asked me to wear you out so they wouldn't have to drill this afternoon. Some people have lives, you know. Ha, Liz said. Well, you've worn me out for nothing. Drill is cancelled this afternoon anyway. The War Council is meeting, and then we're having an early dinner because of the concert. Oh, Sasha said, grimacing. In that case, I'm very, very sorry I worked you so hard. I should probably just leave my armor on for this meeting, Liz said as they walked into the deserted duty room. You're expecting heavy fire? Liz nodded. Nobody wants to hear what I have to say. Is it what you say or how you say it? Probably both. I always think that if I tell the truth, people can't help but agree. When they don't, I lose my temper and everything goes south from there. Sasha snorted. That's your mistake, thinking politics has anything to do with the truth. So it doesn't matter what you say, as long as you make it pretty, Liz said. I should write that down. She peeled off her padded sparring coat, leather armor, and the weights she used to strengthen her arms. Sasha stripped down too. Liz could tell she was chewing on something, trying to decide whether to spit it out. What?
Liz said finally. "I keep thinking about something my da told me about making a sail." Sasha's da had died when she was just a littling, but he seemed to have been a gusher of wisdom because she was always quoting him. "What did he say?" "Well, you know, we had a stall in Rag Market," Sasha said. "Where he fenced stolen and smuggled goods." Liz nodded. "He said when you're trying to sell a lady a shawl, you don't plunge in talking about upland sheep's wool or indigo dye or hand-knotted fringe." "You don't?" "Maybe she don't care about any of that. No, you find out what she wants, what's missing in her life, and then you show her how that shawl fills the bill. So, if she's starving, you tell her she can eat the shawl." "Never mind," Sasha growled, cheeks flaming. "I was just trying to help." "Hang on," Liz said, putting her hand on Sasha's arm. "I'm sorry. Can you give me an example?" "So, she says she don't need a shawl, it's too expensive, and she's got a warm coat already. But you're talking, and you find out she loves her grandchildren and wishes they'd visit more often. So you paint a picture of her, sitting at the fireside with all those grandchildren, snuggled up in that shawl. That's what she's buying, not just a shawl." Liz laughed. "Thank you. I'll try to remember that." Sasha gathered up the equipment and practice swords, cradling them in her arms like a load of kindling. "Everybody's excited about the concert tonight," she said. "There's banners up all over town. I think your whole salvo's planning to be there. Littlefield and Mason, anyway." Great, Liz thought. What if they show up and Shadow doesn't? I'll never hear the end of this. "What are you planning to wear? Wait, let me guess. Your mourning coat." That was Liz's standard dress-up garb. It seemed to suit every occasion. But not this time. "Aunt Melanie's lending me a dress," she said. Sasha said, her lips twitching as she fought back a smile. "That'll be a sight to see." "It's not like you haven't seen me in a dress before." "Not one of Princess Melanie's dresses. What about Shadow? What's he wearing? I don't think I've ever seen him dressed up." Liz shrugged. "I don't know. He's not back yet." "He's not?" Sasha struggled to wipe away the surprise on her face. "Oh, I thought you'd be practicing." "I've been practicing some, on my own," Liz said. "Probably he has too. We're both writing new songs that we'll do solo." Sasha bit her lip. "Have you heard from him?" Liz shook her head. "I'm not worried," she lied. "He said that he wouldn't be back until right before the concert." "You mean like now? It is right before the concert." "He'll come," Liz said. "Music was always really important to him. Besides, he won't let me down. Unless something's happened to him." Just then the bells of the cathedral tower bonged the half-hour. "Bones," Liz said. "I'd better hurry and clean up, or Juliana will think I've gone back to wallowing in the mud." "Good luck, Liz," Sasha called after her. When Liz walked into the library, a cheerful fire was blazing on the hearth. The council members were scattered around the room, chatting informally. Her mother was poring over maps she'd spread across the large central table, maps of the fells and neighboring Tamron and Arden. "Why do you need maps of places you never intend to set foot in?" Liz thought. Liz had maps on her walls, too. Drawings of military targets south of the border, schemes for how to get a northern army in and out. "You should talk," she scolded herself. "You aren't going anywhere either." When Liz entered, the Queen looked up and nodded briskly. "There you are. Help yourself to some tea, if you'd like. We'll get started in a few minutes." To Liz's surprise, Finn Sulmander was at the sideboard, stirring honey into 2 cups of tea. He'd never attended the council before. "What are you doing here?" Liz whispered, coming up beside him and looking over the meager spread on offer. "My father asked Uncle Micah to bring me to this meeting. Finn said, sipping at his tea and adding a little more sweetening. He wants me to know more about decision-making here in the capital, and how to plan battle strategy, especially since I'll be here in the city full-time. Lord Vega says that maybe I can take his place at some of the meetings related to the health service. Spend a little time at these meetings, and you might find you prefer the battlefield, Liz thought, though she'd swap Vega for Finn any day. Here's a tip, she said. Try to stay awake. Everyone notices if you fall asleep. Finn pretended to scowl. Oh, too bad. I thought I could get a nap in, so I'll be fresh for the concert tonight. Liz all but choked on her tea. You're coming to that? It was beginning to register that the audience would be made up of actual people that she knew, that she'd see again. He nodded. I wouldn't miss it. Besides, your Aunt Melanie seems to be eager to show you off, and Juliana's really excited about it. She is? Liz thought. Watching him carry 2 cups of tea back to the table, setting one down in front of Juliana and taking a seat between her and his uncle-cousin, Micah Bayard. With the 2 wizards side by side, their heads together, talking, the resemblance was striking, save that one was dark, the other light. Bayard was draped in the high wizard stoles that had once belonged to Lys's father. As long as she lived, she would never get used to that. Lys took her usual seat to the right of the Queen. She looked around the table, thinking about what Sasha had said. She'd known most of the council members all of her life. But what did they really want? Her mother was easy. She wanted to preserve the queendom and the line. She wanted to protect what was left of her family, that being Lys. That tended to make her more cautious, less eager to take chances. The key would be convincing her that doing nothing brings its own risks. Captain Byrne sat to the left of her mother. As the Queen's bound captain, he wanted to protect the queendom and the Grey Wolf line. He might back a change in strategy if he believed that the line was in danger otherwise. Beside him was Shiloh Trailblazer, clad in her deerskin leggings and coat, her hair entirely beaded and braided, signifying her many kills. Shiloh was matriarch of Demon Eye Lodge and commander of its famous clan warriors. The Demon Eye were born to fight, but they preferred to do it in their beloved mountains, where they had the upper hand. Lys would have to make a good case to move them to a different field of battle. Randolph Howard drummed his fingers on the table, then riffled through the notes spread out before him, as if he had places to go and better things to do. A merchant and member of the Vale nobility, he served as a quartermaster of sorts, arranging for supplies for the Felsian fighting forces. Howard could always find a way to make money, in peacetime or wartime. Char Dunedain commanded the regular army, the Highlander forces. She was smart, tough, and experienced, with an extra share of courage. She wanted a strategically important mission with clear goals that would not spend her soldiers' lives thoughtlessly. Bayard represented the Wizard Council. When it came to offense, they were likely to balk at crossing into Arden, where they might be captured and collared. Still, wizards might be her most reliable allies if she could make her case. They'd seen what happened to the gifted in the Empire, and they had no desire to see that replicated in the North. Lord Vega sat to Juliana's left, but he kept leaning across her to speak with Finn. Vega was the health minister and overseer of the healing halls. Lys couldn't imagine why he'd chosen that profession. He was arrogant, mean-spirited, and totally lacking in empathy. What Lord Vega wanted was to go back to some golden age in his imagination, when people knew their place and wizards were kings. At the far end of the table, Hadley de Villiers met her gaze and brought her fist to her chest in a mock solemn salute. Hadley was the commander of the fledgling Felsian Navy. She wasn't much older than Lys, but she'd built the Navy from nothing in a few short years. Hadley tended to avoid politics, but she was a friend who could usually be counted on. Across from Hadley sat Lys's cousin Juliana, next to her mother, the Princess Melanie. Melanie had never had much to say, but Juliana was cut from different cloth. She tended to be outspoken. She asked a lot of questions and offered her opinions freely. Though she'd known Juliana nearly all her life, Lys realized that she had no idea what Juliana wanted. How could that be? "I hope you've enjoyed lounging about here in the luxury of the capital," the Queen said by way of a beginning. "What's it been, 3 weeks now?" Laughter rippled through them. Though a step up from their summer encampments in the borderlands, wartime Fellsmarch was not exactly luxurious. "The beds are too soft," Trailblazer grumbled. "All wrong for my demon-eye bones." "All this rich food," General Dunedain said, pinching the non-existent fat at her waist. "I can scarcely fit into my uniforms." Even Bayard joined in. "The non-stop parties grow tiresome after a while," he said wryly. "I'm so glad you feel that way," her mother said, "because we have work to do. As you know, the fallow season is when we discuss our military strategy and consider whether we need to make any changes. That's what I would like to focus on today. As usual, I would encourage you all to speak freely, knowing that what we say here will stay in this room." Lord Bayard stood. "Your Majesty, before we begin, I would like to introduce my cousin's son, Finn Sulmander, and to thank you for allowing him to sit in and observe our proceedings." "Welcome, Finn," the Queen said. "Feel free to ask questions as we move through the agenda. Now, General Dunedain, let's start with you." And so it began, the annual ritual that Lys had grown to detest. No matter what had happened on the battlefield during the year, the outcome was always the same. Let's keep doing what we've been doing. Dunedain reviewed the victory at Queen Court and the massacre at Fortress Rocks. This was old news to most of the council. "One point of clarification," Lys said. "Since it seems clear now that Queen Court was just a diversion from the attack on Fortress Rocks, I don't think we can call it a win. Yet the southern forces at Queen Court suffered heavy losses," Dunedain said. "True," Lys said, "but the troops they lost appeared to be poorly trained conscripts from the Downrealms. It's not like Arden had a lot invested in them." "There you go again," Hadley said, wincing. "Snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. Can't you just bask in glory for once?" "I just don't want to mislead anyone," Lys said. "Still," Raisa said, "isn't it true that the Ardenine battalion was decimated, and they lost 4 mages?" "That's true," Lys said. "The difference between us and them is that the King of Arden doesn't care." "Stipulated," the Queen said, and amusement rippled through the council. She turned back to Dunedain. "Continue." "Lord Dimitri and our allies in the Fens have been keeping the enemy busy in the west," Dunedain said. "They've also captured quite a bit of ordnance, along with supplies and foodstuffs, which should help us through the winter and again in the spring." Lys knew what the summation would be. At the end of the marching season, neither side had gained ground. The Southerners had sustained more casualties, in absolute numbers anyway, but the Queendom had lost hundreds of civilians and millions of crowns' worth of property. "Each one of our soldiers is worth 3 of theirs," Howard said, with the kind of fierce pride displayed by those who've never raised a sword themselves. "Our soldiers have to be," Dunedain said. "The South can field 3 times as many troops as we can. Southern weapons can't compete with clan-made blades and longbows," Shiloh said. "Aye, our weapons are better," Dunedain said. "It's just difficult to lay our hands on enough of them. The problem is the Ardenine blockades of our ports," Howard said, looking pointedly at Hadley. "Which brings us to Lady Barrett. the Queen said, ignoring Howard's glare. "How goes our negotiation with the portmasters in the Southern Islands?" Juliana grimaced. "Negotiating with them is like trying to catch a fish with your bare hands. Just when you think you've got a grip on them, they slip away. They'll build ships for us. Our money spends as good as any. But they're wary of opening their ports to us for shipping or for military use. They're just too vulnerable to Arden."
"Is there any news from Arden?" Captain Byrne asked. "From within the realm, I mean."
Lys came instantly alert. "From what we're hearing, Montaigne is at odds with the Thane Council over the war," Juliana said. "He sold them a quick win, with spoils for everyone who agreed to supply men and money. Some are questioning whether our rocky bit of ground is worth what they've spent in men and treasure."
"Do you think it will amount to anything?" Bayard asked.
Juliana shrugged. "Hard to say. King Gerard has a history of ruthlessly quenching any spark of rebellion. Ask his 6 dead brothers." The Queen smiled sourly. "Anything else?" "They seem to have tightened their grip on Delphi," Juliana said. "Recently the Blackbirds have restricted travel into and out of the city. It's made it more difficult to stay in touch with our eyes and ears there. Arden must be expecting some kind of trouble."
"Let's hope they are right, Lady Barrett.
Lord Bayard, your assessment of our magical resources. Is there a shortage of flashcraft as well?"
Bayard shook his head. "Not really, Your Majesty. So many of the gifted have been killed that we have more than enough amulets to go around."
"He looks tired," Lys thought, feeling an unexpected flicker of sympathy, and discouraged.
"They seem to be growing more and more sophisticated in their use of magic," Bayard went on, "which means that we are losing some of our advantage in that arena."
"Thank you, everyone, for your insights," the Queen said, scribbling a few notes and putting down her pen.
"Here it comes," Lys thought.
"In summary, the war goes on, but we've done well against superior numbers and vastly greater resources. I think we can be proud of our Highlanders, our clan warriors, our young navy, and all of the citizens who have sacrificed so much to keep us all free." She raised her glass, and the others followed suit, murmuring,
"Hear, hear!"
That was always the post-mortem. "We've done well, considering. Against all odds, we've survived one more year. Raise a glass to that." "Does this feel like freedom?" Lys said, pushing to her feet. "Or a life sentence?"
There followed an awkward silence. "In regard to," Captain Byrne said.
"In regard to all the things that make life worthwhile," Lys said. "Can upland traders travel throughout the realms the way they used to do?" she said, looking at Trailblazer. "Can metalsmiths create the amulets and jewelry that made them famous throughout the 7 realms, or do they spend all their time producing weapons? Can children roam the forests freely, the way our parents did? Can we sail from our ports without risking being taken by the enemy? Do our wizards sleep well at night, knowing that they might be collared and enslaved? Can the blooded queen of the realm walk through the streets of the capital without looking over her shoulder?"
"I don't know why not," Lord Howard said, a little huffily. "There hasn't been an attack on the royal family for nearly 4 years."
"But people keep on dying, don't they?" Lys said. "People we can't afford to lose. Do you think we're safe, Captain Byrne?" Lys felt bad putting him on the spot, but Byrne didn't flinch.
"I don't know, Your Highness," he said, "but I'll do everything in my power to make it so."
"I know you will," Lys said, "but as we've seen, sometimes that isn't enough. We all agree that we're doing better than anyone expected, but how many of you think that we are winning?" She looked down the table. No one raised a hand.
"Maybe we're not winning," Trailblazer said finally, "but we're not losing either."
"I disagree. We're losing plenty," Liz said. What we've lost is irreplaceable. I'm not just talking about Hannah and Adrian and my father. We're losing our future. We're losing opportunity. Think of what we could do with the money we're spending on the war. We've got litlings in the mines and fighting in the mountains instead of going to school or the academy or apprenticing in the trades. Where will the Demon Eye get their weapons when no one is left who knows how to make them?
Shadow Dancer has been learning from his father, Trailblazer said. The work he is doing is as good as any I've seen.
That's true, Liz said. But both Shadow and his father are walking dangerous trails these days. Death will find them, if the war goes on long enough. Our officers are strategic geniuses compared to the Southerners. But, General Dunedain, how long can you continue to work miracles with the soldiers and ordnance that you have? How many battles might we have won outright if we'd had more in the way of resources?
That's hard to say, Dunedain replied. I'm not a seer.
If I threw down the scrying bones and told you that the Empire would never claim the queendom, but the war would go on forever, how many of you would want to sign on? They all shifted in their seats and looked away. Hadley held up her hand, her forefinger and thumb an inch apart.
Damn, Liz, I was just this close to being happy.
Your Highness,
Lord Vega said, verbally patting her on the head.
We all wish the war would go away. Until it does, we haven't a choice.
The war doesn't go away until we make it go away, Liz said. The only way to make it go away is to take a risk.
Do you have something specific in mind, Alyssa?
Queen Raisa said with a trace of impatience. We need to draw blood on their side of the border. We should let them know that we have teeth. Wolves honor no borders when they are on the hunt.
Trailblazer frowned. Are you suggesting that we deploy our own assassins into Arden?
Isn't that exactly what Montaigne will expect? Hadley said. He sends out assassins, and we answer back in the same way. I'll bet he's harder to get at than our royal family.
He is, Juliana said, folding her hands in front of her. There have been several attempts on the King of Arden's life already, all unsuccessful. The others looked at her, waiting for her to elaborate, but she didn't.
Meadowlark,
Trailblazer said, using Lys's clan name.
I don't blame you for wanting to get revenge on the Southerners, after everything that has happened. But
I'm not talking about revenge, Lys said. I'm talking about a strategy that might help us win the war. And I'm not talking about assassins, specifically. We need to launch an offense that will get their attention.
If you're thinking of an invasion, we're spread thin as it is, Dunedain said. It's not just recruiting and training the soldiers. It's maintaining a supply chain once they get down on the flatlands. I fought there before, and it's a different kind of war, and not one that plays to our strengths. She paused. Our soldiers are tired, Your Highness. Many are recovering from wounds. We've always used the dark season to recover. Would you ask them to march out again?
Lys groped for an answer, conscious that she was losing ground.
We don't have to march to Arden's court, she said. We just need to put a dent in their wall of invisibility.
I agree with Alyssa, Juliana said, which startled everyone into silence, including Lys. What's that about? Lys thought, staring at her cousin.
I do too,
Hadley said, planting her hands on the table and thrusting out her chin.
And I,
Finn said.
We can't afford to risk soldiers just to put a scare into the Southerners, Dunedain said.
What the Princess Heir is talking about is not an empty gesture, Juliana said. If their council is weary of the war now, imagine their reaction if they actually begin to lose territory to us. The cost of this war is going to seem awfully high. A nasty turn in the war might be just what is needed to shift the balance of power and make Montaigne's overthrow seem possible.
We've been at war my entire life, Hadley said. Too many of my friends have died young. I hear the elders talk about the good old days, knowing that they're never coming back. That's a pretty low standard for success."
"I don't understand why we need to change our tactics, Your Majesty," Trailblazer said. "We have always waited for Arden to come to us. They impale themselves on our slopes, and our archers finish them. These younglings have not yet learned the value of patience."
That was when Lys realized that every one of her age mates was on her side. "I don't want to send my children to war," Juliana said fiercely, which Lys found surprising because her cousin had none. She wasn't even married. The Queen smiled faintly, her lashes wet with tears. "I never wanted to send my children to war either," she said, lacing and unlacing her fingers. That was like a knife to the gut. Bayard glared at the three of them.
"It is easy for the young to look back critically at what their elders have done. Do you have any idea what this queen has accomplished over these past 25 years? She has done the impossible in keeping the Red Hawk of Arden outside our borders. That may not be everything we want, but it will have to be enough."
Lys hadn't intended to sound critical of her mother's war strategy, but that was the way it was coming off. "We don't have to decide this issue now," her mother said. "I suggest we defer this topic until we meet after the solstice holiday. It may be that we can come up with some changes in strategy that will satisfy all parties in time for the next marching season." If it's not too late, Lys thought. "Sometimes there is more risk in doing nothing than in doing something," she said. She paused, memory washing over her like dark waters closing over her head. "When I was 9 years old, my brother and I were out in a small boat, and it capsized. I managed to grab hold of a rock just offshore. The tide was coming in, and I knew that I had to swim to my brother, but that meant I had to let go of the rock. I did it, but it was one of the hardest things I've ever done." Trailblazer nodded thoughtfully. Uplanders often used stories to make a point.
"What does your boating accident have to do with the war?"
Lord Howard said. "My point is, we need to let go of what we have been doing and take a chance. If we do what we've always done, we'll get what we've always gotten. This never-ending war. We can't tread water forever. Eventually, we will drown." 9. Brion. It might have been the craving that woke him. That was the usual. Or the sound of stealthy movement, which was not. Brion's hand found his shiv before he cracked open his eyes. Someone crouched on the filthy floor next to him, rooting through his things.
"Goose,"
he said through parched lips.
"Don't waste your time."
Goose lurched backward, landing on his ass.
I was just shut it."
As always, Brion regretted waking up. Every part of him hurt, and as was happening more and more often, he had no idea where he was. It was too cold for the clothes he wore, the air seemed thin, and he could no longer smell the sea. It only made his own stench more apparent. He smelled of sweat and stingo, leaf and fish. Fish? It must be daytime. He could see light leaking in around the window shutters. He must have slept like the dead. He propped up on his elbows in a sudden panic, but his jafasa still lay next to him in its padded bag. He ran his hand over it, making sure it was real. It would have gone missing long ago, but the others knew better than to touch it. Wax found it useful for Brion to keep it. It was a tool of the trade in their traveling show. They were in a city. He heard temple bells close by. That muddle of blankets in the corner would be Aubrey. Out of their original dozen, they were the only 4 left. Brion supplied the talent, Aubrey the looks,
And Goose, he was a fine acrobat when he was feeling well, which was almost never these days. Wax was supposed to handle the business end, book their shows and arrange for travel, but he mainly made his money dealing leaf. Wax was a sorry cod's head of a manager, to tell the truth. Brion had plans. He was leaving too, any day now.
I thought Wax would be back by now, Goose whined. I could use a wake-up if you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean, Brion thought. His head throbbed like a drum that had been pounded all night.
Where are we again? The capital, Goose said. Bell's March, in the mountains. For real?
Brion said with a spark of interest.
I always wanted to see the mountains.
He stood, all but losing his breeches in the process. He was losing weight again. There was never any food around these days, and when he was using leaf, he burned it up like a furnace. Goose, as usual, stayed on point.
Do you think they even have leaf here? I mean, it's all snow and ice, isn't it? You can get whatever you want here, Brion said. It's the capital.
Like he knew any more than Goose. He paused.
How'd we get here again? Wax got us a spot air fish wagon from the coast, Goose said. Remember?
Right. That explained the smell clinging to his clothes. Brion walked out to the privy, which looked and smelled like privies everywhere. They were in a narrow lane in a tangle of streets lined with tenements and warehouses. It might be the capital, but it wasn't much of a step up from the coastal towns he was used to. It was colder than the coast, but warmer than he expected it would be, in the mountains. The streets were cobblestoned, not mud like some, and on every side snow-covered peaks loomed up behind the buildings, like the walls of a stone prison. Or a palace, depending on how you looked at it.
It's all about attitude,
Wax liked to say, when he got them yet another gig in a run-down tavern or clicket house. A few blocks up, he could see towers poking up above the buildings. Must be the temple. Slitting his eyes against the painful sunlight, he followed the wall out to the high street to see what he could see. Sometimes the temples had food on offer. He needed to fill his belly before Wax came back. Another hit of leaf and he'd forget he was hungry at all. In that, he lucked out. On the plaza in front of the temple, dedicates were handing out bread and oranges. Oranges! That struck a chord deep inside him. Where would he have tasted oranges before? Brion had no idea. It was like somebody had wiped huge chunks of his life from his memory. His mouth remembered, though, because it watered as he lined up with the others. Looking forward, he saw that Aubrey had somehow got in line ahead of him. She turned and smirked at him. That was Aubrey, 2 years older and always 2 steps ahead. The dedicate offered a blessing along with the bread and fruit.
Could I have another?
Brion asked, meaning the food, not the blessing.
For my friend.
The dedicate gave Brion a good look-over as he handed off seconds.
If you need help, he said, you'll find it inside.
He tipped his head toward the temple. Brion shook his head.
I'm not much for religion,
he said around a mouthful of bread. The dedicate smiled, showing perfect blue-blood teeth.
It's not only religion, he said. We offer help of a more practical kind. Classes, housing, a chance to get clean.
Brion raised the hand, clutching the bread.
This is all I need right now, he said. Thank you.
He cast around for the proper title, then finished with,
Your Honor.
Call me Samuel, the dedicate said.
Samuel?
Brion got off a little bow and started to turn away.
There's a free concert tonight,
Samuel persisted, pointing to a banner draped across the front of the temple. The Briar Rose Ministry presents H.R.H. Alyssa Anna Reza in concert tonight, with Rogan Shadow Dancer and the Temple Dancers. One night only. Southbridge Temple. Free will offering.
It says that I can read,
Brian growled. When and where he'd learned, he had no clue. People said that Leaf fried the brain, and maybe that was true. He could quit any time, and maybe he should.
Since you can read, you might enjoy our library,
Samuel said, gesturing toward the temple. He seemed to be one of those dedicates who are so hot to do good, they don't know when to give up.
Thank you, Your Honor. I need to go see my friend over there.
He nodded at Aubrey, who was watching, doubled over with laughter.
Sometimes you need to feed the spirit along with the body,
Samuel called after him. He turned to his next customer, who'd been shifting his feet, probably worried he'd starve to death during the sermon. The temple was a stone's throw from the river, and Aubrey was sitting on a bench overlooking the water. She scooted over to make room for Brian. That's when he noticed she'd snagged 3 helpings and was finishing off the first.
How'd you get 3?
Brian scowled at her. Aubrey patted her midsection, where her belly should have been, and put on this vacant, cow-eyed look.
I lied. I told him I had a bun in the oven.
From the look on her face, you'd think she had no idea how it got there. Brian laughed. Aubrey was a natural felon. She'd been the one to teach him how to survive on the streets of a harbor town. She'd taught him other lessons, too, after the lights were out. She wasn't much of a musician, but she brought in the men in droves to see their sorry little show. Sometimes, when Goose was feeling good, he and Aubrey would do funny bits together. Sometimes Brian thought he might be in love with her. How was he to know, since he'd never been in love before? Leastwise, he always enjoyed what she had to teach him. She was the only person in his tattered memory who had ever been kind to him. But lately she'd seemed more snappish and standoffish. Brian peered over the stone wall at the river. It was the cleanest he'd ever seen in any city. Though it was nearly midwinter, tiny flowers cascaded over the wall. He picked a few and held them out to Aubrey. She sniffed at them, then set them on the bench beside her. Encouraged, Brian scooted closer.
It's kind of romantic, having a picnic by the river.
Putting his hand on her knee, he leaned in for a kiss, but Aubrey turned her head away.
Tell me that again when you aren't stinking of fish.
She licked her fingers and wiped them on the bench. She's sure moody, he thought. When Brian and Aubrey ducked back through the door of the crib, Wax was back and having a litter of kittens.
Where have you been?
Wax gripped the front of Brian's jacket and gave him a shake.
Why is it you always wander off just when I need you? Take it easy, Brian said, wrenching loose. If I'd have known you needed me, I wouldn't have wandered off.
He eyed Wax warily. It had been a long time since Brian's self-styled manager had shown that much interest in him. Wax could be much too creative when it came to ways Brian could earn his keep, ways that crossed the boundaries Brian had set for himself. He'd been with Wax since he was a pretty blonde 10-year who needed protection in the southern harbor town of Baston Bay. He was grown now, 16 years old, and able to make his way on his own. More and more he was beginning to question whether staying with this lot did him any good. Aubrey would be fine. She knew how to land on her feet. Lately she'd been gone a lot, and Brian suspected she had her own game going. He was surprised she'd stayed this long. But what about Goose? What would happen to him if Brian left? Brian was bringing in most of the money these days, and Wax could be ruthless when crossed. He could be ruthless any time he thought it would do him some good.
So what's up? Brian said. Did you bring anything back for us?
Brian could take or leave the leaf, but Goose was in a bad way. Wax's gaze flickered away.
I got nothing for you now, he said, but we'll be in gravy tonight. You'll just have to tough it out until then.
Brion clamped his teeth to keep his thoughts from spilling out, then opened them enough to say,
What happens tonight? That gig I was talking about, it's on.
Wax rubbed his thumb and fingers together.
It's real money this time. I told you the capital was a place to be.
His eye lit on the food Brion was clutching.
Is that an orange? Where'd you get that?
He grabbed it out of Brion's hand and began peeling it. Brion tossed the remaining bread to Goose before it went the way of the orange. It wasn't what Goose wanted, but it was all Brion had.
I'll need a hit if we've got a show tonight,
Goose whined, taking a big chomp out of the bread.
It's just Bree,
Wax said, jerking a thumb at Brion.
Not you. Hang on, what kind of a gig are we talking about?
Brion asked, instantly on guard.
It's, you know, a private concert,
Wax said.
Somebody heard you play back at Boston Bay, and nothing would do but you'd come and play for him here. A private concert?
Brion raised an eyebrow. He'd heard that before.
I got you some new clothes, Wax said, and I've arranged for a bath at an inn across the river.
An inn, right.
Forget it,
Brion said, his cheeks burning. He sat down on the floor next to his Jafasa, wrapping his arms around his knees.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I'm a musician, not a fancy. No, no, no,
Wax protested, shaking his head.
You've got it all wrong, and aren't like that.
Oh? Brion undid the buckles on the case and lifted the instrument out.
What's it like, then? It's a concert,
Wax insisted.
In front of quality. You can't go into it stinking of fish.
Who's the audience? Brion demanded.
Who's paying, and what's the money? And where's the concert? The concert aren't at the inn,
Wax said. As usual, he picked the question he wanted to answer.
Where is it, then? Ah, Bree, Wax said sadly. I remember when you were such a charming, trusting boy, who relied on me to— I've learned that charm aren't enough, Brion said, and trust has to be earned,
and that I can't rely on you to tell the truth. Wax heaved a put-upon sigh.
You'll be singing for a girlie, he said. She'll be attending a concert at the temple around the corner.
Brion recalled the banner draped over the entrance to the temple. That must be the one.
You'll begin singing and playing when she passes by. You know it's on the up and up, because it'll be out in public.
How does that make it on the up and up? Brion thought. Bad things happen in public all the time.
She walks by, I sing to her, and that's it.
Wax nodded.
See? Easy money. Why? Why what? Why does this client want me to sing to this girlie? He wants you to woo her for him.
Well, that explained the bath and the change of clothes, but it didn't explain Wax's shifty-eyed look.
That kind of thing can go wrong, you know, Brion said. A girlie is not like a pork bun. It's not like I can woo and win her and then hand her off to someone else. I guess he just wants you to put her in the mood,
Wax said, licking his lips in a suggestive way, which wasn't at all appealing on him.
Sing some romantic ballads to soften her up a little. She's a blue blood, and he's not. He's hoping you can help him make his case.
I don't like it, Brion said, running his fingers over the strings, hearing the notes float up like magic.
Every other spark in town uses blue ruin to talk a girlie into making a bad decision. I'd just as soon not get mixed up in that. He's offering 40 crowns,
Wax said, playing his trump card.
Blood and bones, Goose muttered. 40 girlies, for a love song.
Girlie was also the popular name for the coin of the realm, which bore an image of a crown on one side and a silhouette of a royal on the other.
It was rare that one girlie crossed Brienne's palm, let alone 40. That was a small fortune, and if Wax quoted 40, it likely meant the lovelorn suitor had offered 60.
I thought you said this cove wasn't a blue blood,
Brienne said.
Where would he get that kind of money? It's not just blue bloods that are rich, you know.
Right, there's rushers and thieves and street lords, Brienne said.
And I don't want to mix with none of them. 40 girlies, Bree,
Goose said, picking at his blankets with his busy hands.
Don't you want to bring these young lovers together?
Wax pressed him.
He just wants to talk to her. Talk to her. Are you sure that's all he means to do? Look, when the concert lets out, there will be all kinds of people in the streets and blue jackets everywhere. What could happen?
Wax stroked his wispy beard. Brienne sighed, running his hand through his filthy hair. It wasn't just Goose that was hurting. It had been a very lean year.
All right, he said, already working out a set list. I'll do it.
Good boy,
Wax said, all smiles.
Now we'll just... If,
Brienne added.
Wax blinked at him.
If what? I know this cove gave you money down,
Brienne said. He stuck out his hand, wiggling his fingers.
He did, but I spent it on your new clothes and the bath and all.
Wax whined.
Not all of it,
Brienne said.
We all need a good meal, and me and Goose aren't going to wait until tonight. When the payment's made, I get 25 girlies. Goose and Aubrey each get 5. Why do they get 5? They didn't do nothing to earn it. 'Cause we're all in this together, Brienne said. Isn't that what you always say? Share and share alike. What about my finder's fee? Only 5 crowns?
I'm guessing you've already claimed your fee, Brienne said.
Take or leave. All right,
Wax grumbled, and the fact that he gave in told Brienne all he needed to know. Wax dug in his carry bag, pulled out a purse, and handed it over. It wasn't all that heavy, and no doubt it was stuffed with steelies and not the girlies Bree was looking for.
How will I know who to sing to? Brienne asked. Do you have something that belongs to her?
Brienne could charm almost anyone, as long as he had an instrument to channel through. It helped if he could look the person in the eyes. It helped even more to have a connected object. A beloved object was even better.
You'll be meeting your client on the corner of Southbridge and River Street, just the other side of the river from the temple. He'll have something of hers to give you. Do you even know what her name is? Nah.
Wax slapped him on the back, nearly knocking him over.
No worries. I have faith in you. Just sing. What with that and your pretty face, she'll come.
10. Outplayed. Dinner was early, and even more informal than usual in these lean times. The Queen had issued an all-hands invitation in honor of the concert later that evening, proclaiming it the launch of the holiday season. The dining room was already crowded when Liz walked in. Automatically, she scanned the room for potential ambushes. She hated this kind of gathering, with everyone jostling for position. Seeing the diverse mingle of people, Liz relaxed a little. She spotted Cam Staunton in his dress blues, scouting the dessert table. As she watched, he scooped up 2 biscuits and stuffed them into his mouth. When he turned and saw Liz watching, his face went scarlet, which contrasted nicely with the powdered sugar around his mouth.
You look for witnesses before you snitch the biscuit, Private, Liz said. Yes, ma'am,
Staunton blurted, spewing a few crumbs.
Sweet Lady of Mercy,
he muttered, then saluted and hurried away.
Your Highness.
Liz turned and saw that it was Finn Sulmander, in a midnight blue velvet coat that set off his silver blonde hair and his black eyes,
his Fellscat stoles over top.
Finn bowed and kissed her hand, his lips leaving the buzz of wizardry on her skin.
Your Highness, I want you to know that I agreed with what you said in the council meeting today, that we're losing the war, but no one will admit it.
I didn't exactly say we were losing, Liz said. I only questioned whether we were winning. There's a difference. She was sure there must be, though she'd be at a loss to explain it.
Still, there are many who believe that we are on a path to disaster.
He gripped her hands hard, and his voice shook a little. Hey now, Liz said. It's been a long season. As for the council, sometimes it just takes time to win people over to a new way of thinking. It's not supposed to be easy. Even as she said this, she couldn't believe those words were coming out of her mouth.
What they don't understand is that time is running out,
Finn said. With that, he seemed to gather himself and remember that he was in a room full of people.
I apologize, he said. After all, we have lots to celebrate tonight.
We do? Liz thought as he bowed and turned away. Biting her lower lip, she watched him cross the room. The war doesn't end when the fighting stops, she thought. There were so many walking wounded among her friends. If the war ended today, how long would it take the realm to heal? Sighing, she headed for the food and drink herself. The recent winter court arrivals were swarming the meager spread after months of trail food. Greeting several hungry members of her salvo, Liz helped herself to a biscuit and a glass of wine. Turning away from the sideboard, she found herself face to face with Quill Bosley, resplendent in his dress Highlander uniform.
"Sweet Alyssa," he said with a bow, "I hoped you would be here."
And I hoped you wouldn't be, Liz thought, looking around for an excuse to escape, and seeing none. "Lieutenant?" she said, inclining her head in greeting.
"I just heard the good news," he said. "I understand that congratulations are in order, Captain. Or should I call you the Grey Wolf?"
"Captain will do," she said. It was an honor to be selected, when there are so many more experienced officers to choose from.
"Well, it's not surprising that General Dunedain would want to get into your good graces. I'm not saying you didn't deserve it, of course."
Bosley winked at her, as if her promotion were some kind of cozy insider joke. Bosley was one of several suitors who had displayed interest in Liz last social season. These overtures were mostly quick forays and quicker retreats. Bosley had been more persistent than most, showing up on her dance card repeatedly, despite her penchant for awkward conversation and stepping on feet. The youngest son of a member of the Vale nobility, he seemed to be pursuing an alternate route to advancement. Liz had been polite at first, reasoning that at least, as soldiers, they'd have something in common to talk about. But the more time she spent with him, the less she liked him. It seemed that he was more interested in getting under her small clothes than in anything she had to say about strategy. Now he seemed to think that he had staked some kind of claim. Though he'd called on her several times since she'd been home, she'd managed to avoid a face-to-face. With the advent of the solstice social season, that respite was over.
"I must say, I am disappointed that I've not seen more of you since we've been home,"
Bosley said. "I've been pretty busy," Liz said vaguely. "Our time at home goes by so quickly."
"Which is why we need to make the most of it."
Reaching out, he took both her hands. Why did people keep taking her hands?
"I wondered if you had plans after dinner," he said,
leaning in close so she could smell the stingo on his breath.
"We could go somewhere and exchange war stories."
If he'd really meant that, she might have been tempted, especially if the conversation took place in public. "Too bad," Liz said, pulling her hands free.
I have a recital tonight. In fact, this entire season is incredibly busy. Since I'm out of town so much, there's a lot to pack in. Drilling, marching, meetings, more drilling.
Bosley shifted his weight and fisted his hands.
I understand that your social calendar must be complicated, what with the holiday and all, but surely you— Speaking of social calendars,
Liz said, looking over Bosley's shoulder,
here comes Lord Thornley.
She couldn't ever remember a time when she was glad to see Thornley, until now. Caddis Thornley, Assistant Minister of State, was bearing down on them, or maybe gliding down on them was a better description.
Your Highness,
he said, executing a perfect bow and ignoring Bosley.
Welcome back from the hinterlands. You must be in an absolute frenzy of excitement. Can you believe that we are on the cusp of the most important night of your life?
For a moment, Liz was lost. Oh, she said finally, if you're talking about the concert,
Concert?
Thornley furrowed his brow.
I'm talking about your name day, Your Highness. Your debut.
Oh, Liz said, her confusion clearing. That's still months away.
Exactly my point,
Thornley said, taking her arm and drawing her away from Bosley. In Thornley's case, that would be an intentional snub.
I know you've been busy, but now you are here, and time is of the essence. I told the Queen that I would assume responsibility for planning an exquisite ceremony and celebration. We'll need to put our heads together soon to discuss an invitation list.
Liz's stomach clenched into a knot.
I couldn't ask you to take that on, what with all your other responsibilities, like, diplomacy. Your Highness, I can't think of any diplomatic endeavor more important in the new year than seeing you well married.
Hang on.
My name day is coming, Lord Thornley, Liz said. Not my wedding. Not for a long time.
She swung around to find Bosley still hovering.
Goodbye, Bosley, she snapped.
Bosley bowed stiffly.
Perhaps, Your Highness, I will see you at your name-day party,
he said, his jaw tight. He turned and walked away. Thornley watched him until he was a distance away, then said,
That whelpling is arrogant, isn't he? What makes him think he would be invited?
Look, I'm not really interested in a lavish bash, Liz said. We don't have the money, and I don't have the time. Summer is the marching season, and no doubt I'll be out of the city. I think we should handle name days the way they do in the uplands, with 2 big ceremonies a year, honoring everyone who's turned 16. Each family could contribute a haunch of venison and a keg of ale. Thornley's face just kept twisting until it resembled a sailor's knot of disapproval.
Your Highness, with all due respect,
We would have to have a very large cake in order to fit all the names, Liz said. Or maybe it could just say, to whom it may concern, congratulations. The diplomat's face gradually smoothed into a mask of solicitous concern.
You may think of your debut celebration as frivolous, but it's an important investment in the future of the Queendom. We are in dire need of allies, resources, and money. The right marriage can deliver all that. In order to attract a useful match, we will need a display of power and wealth.
He leaned in closer.
Be realistic, Your Highness. You're not the beauty that your mother is, or your sister Hannah, may she rest in peace, or your cousin Juliana, such a lovely girl. But there's a lot can be done with the proper staging and—
Lord Thornley, I am well aware of the importance of choosing wisely when it comes to an alliance. Rest assured, when I marry, I won't be looking for a pretty face either. I'll find somebody who brings assets that will help us win this war. Liz's voice was rising, and now people were turning to look. Bloody bones, she thought. Now, if you'll excuse me. Without waiting for a response, Lys made her escape before more thoughts slipped past her lips. In her case, that was the key to diplomacy. Escaping before you said what you really thought. Anyway, she'd seen somebody that she actually wanted to talk to. Hadley de Villiers.
"Hadley!" she exclaimed, embracing her. "I didn't know you were back until I saw you at that meeting this morning."
Hadley always evoked thoughts of faraway places. After months away, she looked more exotic than ever, with her sun-bronzed skin, piercings, and tattoos. Her hair a deep black, streaked with blue. Lys held her out at arm's length, studying her.
"Last time I saw you, wasn't your hair—"
"Pink, made too good a target," Hadley said, grimacing. "After a few near misses, I decided to go with something less visible."
"Good idea," Lys said.
"I can't wait to hear stories about exotic ports and naval battles on the high seas."
Stories were all right. Just don't try to get me directly involved.
"I wouldn't exactly call it the high seas," Hadley said, laughing. "Between the Ardenine warships and Carthian pirates, we spent most of our time creeping in and out of inlets and trying to avoid running aground. We never got all that far from shore, but we did keep them busy."
"Did you really see pirates?"
Hadley nodded. "Never very close up, though, and usually sailing the other way. Pirates don't like to tangle with ships that shoot back, especially since we don't carry the kind of swag they're after."
"How long will you be home?" Ardenine ships prowled the seas year-round, so there was no defined fighting season for Hadley.
Hadley shrugged. "I haven't received orders yet, so who knows? When can we catch up over a few beers?" Lys said. "How about tonight? I don't know whether you've heard, but I'm doing this concert tonight." "Oh, I'm coming to the concert," Hadley said, grinning. "I wouldn't miss it. Maybe after the concert we can get a group together."
"Let's do it," Lys said, absurdly happy. "It's been too long." Hadley hesitated, as if debating whether to speak up.
"Just so you know, I'm on board with the idea of an attack on Arden.
I assume you have a target in mind?"
"Several," Lys said with a grim smile.
Dinner was served, and still no Shadow. Lys's concern turned to worry. He'd said he would come, but what if something had happened to him? As she'd said in council, he walked a dangerous road, especially since Aspen died. Dinner was being held early because of the concert, and pretty much everyone at court was invited. Aunt Melanie was hosting. Raisa and Juliana sat up front with her, along with Finn and his parents. Aunt Melanie was dressed up, of course, and Juliana resembled a rare flower, with her porcelain skin and smoky eyes, her hair pulled up to show off her graceful neck. For once, Lys hadn't been included in the seating plan. Since she had a choice, she ate with Hadley, Sasha, Mason, and Littlefield toward the foot of the table. Lys poked at her roast chicken, usually one of her favorites, not being barley, but her stomach was in a turmoil of worry. She'd been sure Shadow would show up for dinner. During dessert, talk inevitably turned to Arden and the war. Can't we ignore the war for just one night? Lys thought. If you're not going to do anything different, then why not talk about something else? Be careful what you wish for. Her mother stood, and the room quieted. She was that kind of person. "I would like to welcome you all to the opening of the season of solstice, when we celebrate the return of the light. We're also celebrating the return of many of you from the battlefield, and honoring those who will never return to us." She raised her glass, and everyone followed suit. "I hope all of you will find joy and peace this holiday season, and the time and space in which to mend your spirit." They all drank. "It is during this festive season that the spark of romance often kindles. the Queen went on. Marriage represents a hope for and belief in the future, something direly needed in a time of war. In that spirit, your host and my sister, the Princess Melanie Anna Mariana, has an announcement. She gestured, and Aunt Melanie rose to her feet amid a buzz of speculation. Aunt Melanie is getting married again, Liz thought. Good for her. Liz scanned the table for possible candidates. Not Lord Mander. He was sitting next to her, but he was already married. Could it be Micah Bayard? Could they have finally come together after all these years? Liz looked down the table to where the wizard sat. He was looking on, smiling, but he displayed no flush of romance. Your Majesty, ladies and gentlemen, it is my very great pleasure to announce the betrothal of my daughter Juliana Anna Melanie to Finn Sulmander. Wait, what? Liz looked down the table to where Finn and Juliana sat next to each other, blushing and smiling. Well, Juliana was blushing, and Finn was smiling. Juliana held up their joined hands to display her engagement ring. A confection of emeralds and diamonds, it glittered in the candlelight. Instantly, Lord Mander was on his feet, raising his glass.
A toast to the happy couple!
Micah Bayard joined him, smiling, raising his own glass.
Hear, hear!
Then Lord Vega.
I couldn't be happier,
he said with a broad smile.
You are the kind of fine young couple this queendom needs more of.
There followed a flurry of toasts and best wishes and questions about wedding plans. Liz dutifully toasted her cousin, then sat, silent as a stump, a smile pasted on her face. It wasn't that she was in love with Finn Sulmander. True, she'd had a crush on him when she was younger, but she'd grown out of that. Pretty much, anyway. It wasn't that she was jealous, exactly. It was just that Thornley's words kept echoing in her head. You're not the beauty that your mother is, or your sister Hannah, may she rest in peace, or your cousin Juliana, such a lovely girl. It was just that Finn and Juliana were so perfect together, like a matched pair of thoroughbreds. It was just that Liz had had no clue this was coming until it actually happened. Finn hadn't said a word about it on the long trail home. It was just so damned humiliating. 11. The Client. The inn was called Mabry's, and it was a clicket house, as Brian had suspected. But the place was clean and well kept, and there was no reason he couldn't take a bath there, as long as he locked the door and kept his shiv by his side. Long, hot baths were rare in Brian's world. It was unusual, too, to get to be first to the tub. Truth be told, it had been a while since he'd had his clothes off, and he was shocked at how thin he'd become. He'd grown taller, and it was like he'd been stretched out, his ribs prominent under his skin. You need to leave the leaf alone, he thought, and he would, soon. He was surprised at how good it felt to stew until his skin got wrinkly, the water turning murky gray around him. When he finally rose, dripping from the tub, his hair was 2 shades lighter, and the stench of fish was gone. As soon as he unfolded the bundle of clothing, he knew Wax hadn't picked them out. He found soft wool breeches, a snowy linen shirt with bloomy sleeves, and a velvet doublet in a rich emerald green. There were warm hose to wear underneath, and a fine hooded cloak with velvet trim to wear over. Everything fit well enough, though he had to cinch in the breeches to keep them from sliding down over his bony ass. He was admiring himself in the mirror, striking poses, when somebody knocked at the chamber door. Brian grabbed up his shiv and said, "Occupied."
"Open up quick, it's Aubrey."
He stowed the shiv and padded to the door.
Aubrey stood outside, holding a pair of boots. Her eyes widened when she saw Brion.
Bones, Bree, will you look at you? You could walk right into any palace and be at home.
Until I opened up my mouth, he said, stepping aside so she could enter. She walked in, stuffing the boots into his arms as she passed.
Try these on, she said. See if they fit.
She glanced into the tub.
Whoa, she said. Plough that up and you could grow barley.
Brion, touched and surprised, cradled the boots.
These are for me. Nah, they're for my other sweetheart, with feet the exact same size as you.
Sweetheart? That was encouraging, in a peculiar way. Brion sat on the edge of the bed and pulled on the boots. They were loose, but another pair of hose or another year's growth would fix that.
Thank you,
he said, sticking out his feet so he could admire them.
Where'd you get these? They were sitting outside one of the other rooms, and they looked like the right size. We'd better be gone before the owner misses them. But first...
Aubrey sat down beside him. Sliding her arms around him, she kissed him, long and deep, pressing him back onto the pillows until his heart was thumping under the fancy doublet.
What was that for?
He said when she broke it off. Not that he was complaining, but it had been a long time since she'd kissed him like that.
I wanted to see what it was like to kiss a gentleman, she said. Well then, Brion said, as long as we're here, would you like to see what it's like to...
She shook her head and put her fingers to his lips.
Like I said, we need to go before the cove down the hall comes looking for his boots, she said. But I wanted to talk to you in private.
She slid her hands down until they circled his neck, and her fingers caressed the mage mark on the back of it. Then she pushed his head down so she could take a closer look. Goose flesh rose on his back and shoulders.
Don't,
he said, pulling free.
Why not? Because I said so.
Aubrey blinked at him, then dropped her hands into her lap. Brion guessed she wasn't used to hearing no. Not from him, anyway.
It's time we went out on our own, she said.
Brion sat back a little, resting his hands on his thighs. He waited.
Wax does nothing for us, only gets in our way, she said. A street lord that can't support his crew doesn't deserve to have one. He's not a street lord, Brion said. He's a manager. We're not a crew, we're a musical troupe.
He couldn't say why it was so important to him to maintain that distinction. Aubrey flipped her hand as if to say, whatever.
You're the one bringing in all the money. Now we have some coin. There'll be more of it coming in, and you have some fine clothes. I say we leave after the gig tonight. And go where? We'll go back to the coast. I've been doing some business on the side down at the harbour. Plus, we can sail anywhere from there. I'll be your manager from now on. What about Goose?
She scowled.
What about him? What happens to him? He stays with Wax, I guess, she said, shrugging. What's he going to live on, with us gone?
She shrugged again.
Wax can fend for himself, Brion said, but if we leave, then Goose comes with. He needs a chance to get clean.
If they left Wax, if his source was gone, it might be easier.
All right,
Aubrey said, rolling her eyes and loosing a put-upon sigh.
Goose comes with.
She stood.
We'd better go back,
she said, all brisk and businesslike.
You go on,
Brion said, saying no for the second time that day.
I'm going to walk over to Southbridge early and see what's what.
Aubrey studied him for a long moment.
All right, she said. Be careful. I'll get things together so we can leave soon as you get back.
She kissed him again in a promising kind of way and swayed out the door. Brion shook his head, laughing at himself. That girl could turn the charm on and off like a spigot. He knew he shouldn't trust her, and yet this thing they had was maybe as close as he'd ever come to being in love. You sing love songs all day long, he thought, but you wouldn't know love if it came up and bit you on the ear. Time was wasting. Brion picked up his jafasa, loped down the stairs, and walked briskly through the common room, careful not to make eye contact with any of the patrons, or respond to any of the suggestive comments that came his way. Once outside, he crossed back to the temple side of the river and entered the big front doors. A dedicate sat at a small reception table just inside the doors, paging through a large illuminated manuscript.
"I was told there was a library,"
Brion said when she looked up. He half expected her to demand why he wanted to know, but she just pointed.
"Down this hall to the right. Go all the way to the end, and you can't miss it."
She returned to her reading. Must be the new clothes, he thought, brushing his fingers over the velvet. The library was the biggest he'd ever seen, 3 stories tall and all paneled in dark woods. They had rolling ladders you could use to reach the highest shelves. Another wall was all little niches, with rolled manuscripts poking out of them. Dedicates were seated at tables here and there, heads bowed over their work. In one corner, a scholar was reading a book to a group of children. At the front desk, a man looked up at Brion's approach, keeping his place in his book with his forefinger.
"I was wondering," Brion said, "if you have any books about ships."
As it turned out, they did. Brion could spend hours reading about ships and the sea. Maybe it was because he'd grown up in a harbor town, watching ships come and go, wishing he were aboard. This one time, a shipmaster had seen him staring longingly at the ships in the harbor and offered to row him out to take a closer look. Brion had been seized with an unreasoning panic and fled. Books were the safer way to go. It was easy to get lost between the covers of a book. He imagined what it would be like, living right here in the temple library, where he could read and read and read, venturing out to the square now and then for bread and oranges. On temple days, he'd go to the Clicket House for a bath. Before he knew it, the bells overhead were bonging, and it was 7 o'clock and time to meet his contact about the gig. Slinging his jafasa over his shoulder, he walked back down the steps, stopping at the table by the door in case they wanted to search him for whatever he'd pocketed. The dedicate just waved him on, out the front door of the temple, under the banner proclaiming the concert. A light snow was falling as Brion crossed back over the bridge to the neighborhood known as Radmarket and turned down the first alley on the left. The alley ran along the rear of a series of riverfront taverns, clicket houses, and tenements. At the end of the first block, he saw a cloaked figure leaning against a lamppost on the corner. When the lamp leaner spotted Brion, he straightened, eyes glittering within the shadow of his hood. The rest was all darkness, like he was one of those demons from scary storybooks that are looking for a new body to live in. Was this the lovelorn suitor? No wonder he was having trouble romancing his girlie. And yet, there was a familiar shine to him, a blue-white glow that Brion had always associated with mages. That can't be right, Brion thought. Mages never have trouble finding a lover. That's what he'd heard, anyway. Maybe he was mistaken. With the client wrapped up as he was, he couldn't get a good look.
"I'm here about a street concert,"
Brion said, wanting to establish the rules of the game up front.
"Are you?"
"You're the spell singer."
The client's voice was as cold as a dead fish across the face, and flat, as if he were trying to disguise it.
"Yes,"
Brion said, not being in the business of splitting hairs, and not knowing what wax might have told him.
"Are you able to charm a person, even if she is wearing a clan-made talisman?"
"Yes," Brion said.
He really had no idea, but he was beginning to think that the answer had better be yes. Was that why he'd been called in? Because this mage had tried and failed? Brion puffed out his chest a little. The stranger looked up and down the street, then motioned for Brion to follow him. Brion did so with a prickle of unease. Wax wasn't all that choosy about who he did business with. Not that Brion had much money in his pockets. He'd spent most of Wax's light purse on some leaf to tide Goose over, and a little for himself.
"You'll be on this corner," the client said, pointing out of the snarl of alleys to where the main road crossed the bridge. "When she comes, you'll move this way down the river bank and bring her along to the riverside park. Stop there."
"How will I know who to sing to? What does she look like?"
"She's tall," the client said, "and big-boned, awkward. She'll be wearing a green dress and a shawl."
That didn't sound like somebody's description of his sweetheart. Brion waited for more and got none.
"Is that it?"
"That isn't enough."
"I don't want to charm up the wrong girl,"
Brion said. If it'd been anyone else, he would have made a joke of it.
What about her hair? What's it like?"
"It's long, and it's a kind of an ochroid color."
"Ochroid?"
Who says ochroid? It sounded like some kind of a disease.
"Like old gold or amber," the client said impatiently. "She may be carrying an instrument case."
"An instrument case?"
Brion said with a spark of interest.
"She's a musician?"
The client ignored the question. Instead, he fished inside his cloak, and Brion heard a soft clink of metal on metal. When the client extended his hand toward him, Brion couldn't help taking a step back. The client released an exasperated breath.
"I was told that you need something of hers in order to spell her," the client said. "Do you want it or not?"
He opened his fist and dropped a locket into Brion's hand. Brion weighed it in his palm. It appeared to be gold, and it was inscribed on the outside with a rose. When he pried it open with a thumbnail, he saw that it contained tiny painted portraits of blue-bloods that seemed to shift before his eyes. He looked up at the client.
"Was this something with sentimental value that—"
"Yes."
When Brion kept studying it, the client hissed,
"Put that thing away before you lose it, and don't let anyone see it."
Brion tucked it away in his breeches pocket, lowering his head to hide the scowl on his face. He did not like this client much at all. Looking up and down the street, the client drew his hood forward, his cloak closer around him. Maybe it was the cold wind, but Brion got the impression that he didn't want to be seen with the likes of him, even in his new clothes.
"I want you to go on playing and singing, and keep her there until I come. Then you can go."
Brion shifted the jafasa on his back, uneasy about greasing this meeting.
"Does the girlie know you? Is this something she'll... You aren't planning to...
"Do you want this job or not?"
The client gripped the front of Brion's fine coat and gave him a shake. Again there came a soft clinking of metal.
"Does this cove have a whole pocket full of lockets from all the girlies he wants to woo?"
"You're being paid, well paid, to sing, not to ask questions."
Brion hesitated. This gig stunk to high heaven, but he really needed it, especially if he and the others were leaving Wax. They'd want traveling money. If he could get money up front, he'd go back and collect Goose and Aubrey and hit the road without any ethical dithers. It was worth a try. He stuck out his hand.
"I need a down payment, 25 crowns.
"I gave the down payment to your handler," the client said. "I'll pay him the rest when you deliver the girl. The concert should be over about 9:30. I want you here at 15:15. You can keep time by the temple bells, understand?"
Brian didn't like it, but Wax had already made the deal, so it was hard to argue the point. He nodded.
Got it. One more thing.
Reaching inside his cloak again, like some kind of street magician, the client produced a bunch of flowers, wrapped loosely in a cloth, and thrust them at Brian.
Give her these.
That was odd. It seemed like his client would want to hand off the flowers himself and make sure he got credit.
You want me to give 'em to her?
Isn't that what I just said?
Brian took the bouquet.
What if she asks who sent these? What should I say?
Tell her it was Darian, the client said.
Darian?
Now remember, keep her there until you see us meet face to face.
Right, Brian said, just wishing this awful client would leave. But Darian had one more thing to say.
Just remember, if you disappoint me, you'll wish you'd never been born.
He turned, the snow eddying around him, and walked away, boots crunching on the icy cobblestones. Brian watched him until he turned a corner and disappeared. Brian stood there, as if frozen to the spot. His hands were full, what with his instrument case and the flowers. Finally, he set his case down in the snow, unbuckled it, and slid the flowers inside, thinking they would make a pretty poor show by the time he handed them off. He really didn't care. He never should have agreed to this gig. He knew that now, but he couldn't see any way out of it. I'll see how things look, he told himself. If it smells too fishy, I'll find a blue jacket. That's what he told himself, but he knew in his heart he wouldn't. 12. The players take the stage. As soon as Aunt Melanie heard about the concert, she'd insisted that Liz borrow a gown from her for the performance. Liz's aunt had a kind of gown museum in her closet, each garment lovingly preserved in a linen wrapper. They were the kind of dresses that nobody could afford these days, even if they could find them. Liz had to try on a dozen before she found one green dress that she could squeeze into. And even that one was so narrow that she could scarcely walk, and it was really too short on her.
You're just big-boned, dear,
Aunt Melanie had said, chewing her lower lip and looking Liz up and down.
There's nothing wrong with that.
It wasn't just bone. Anyone who spent so much time sticking and sparring and practicing with a bow, who spent days on horseback and digging latrines and the like, tended to add layers of muscle. That was a good thing, most of the time, except when a body was trying to get into one of Aunt Melanie's slinky dresses.
I appreciate the offer, Aunt Melanie, but maybe this isn't going to work out, Liz had said. I'm sure I have something that I—
Nonsense, Melanie said. Make your choice, and I'll have it altered.
I don't want you altering your dresses to fit me, Liz said. Then they won't fit you. I'll just wear my clan coat. That will—
Your funeral coat is certainly memorable, Aunt Melanie said, scrunching up her face.
But I think for this occasion you'll want a more festive look.
In the end, Liz went with the too-short green dress, figuring that she could get through the performance anyway. Still, it was a good thing Sasha dropped by and helped her on with it, or she would have been late.
You sure you don't want me to slice it up the sides so you can walk?
Sasha said dubiously, resting her hand on her belt knife.
It's a borrowed dress, Sasha,
Liz said. I'll just have to live with it for a little while. I'll wear my shawl over it and bring something more comfortable to change into right after.
Suit yourself,
Sasha said, fumbling with a row of tiny buttons. The whole thing was faintly ridiculous. Sasha playing chambermaid, helping her into petticoats and lace instead of weapons and armor.
So how about that, Juliana and Finn?
Sasha said around the button-hook, gripped between her teeth.
Did you see that coming?
No, I didn't.
I didn't have a clue either, Sasha said, but I thought maybe Juliana would have told you ahead of time.
We're really not close, Liz said. Despite all her efforts, her voice trembled. With that, Sasha left off buttoning and walked around until she could look Liz in the face.
He's not a good match for you, Liz, she said gently. You're stronger than him in a dozen ways. You can do better, and you will.
Liz was mortified. Am I that easy to read? Does everyone know I've been mooning after Finn Sulmander? Am I the laughingstock of the entire court? Or worse yet, the object of pity?
No,
Sasha said, answering her unspoken question.
Likely I'm the only one that knows, and I'm not telling anyone.
When Liz and Sasha emerged into the stable yard, there were 3 coaches lined up in front of the door, and a small crowd of people waiting to board. Liz spotted Juliana right away. As usual, she was surrounded by a crowd of friends, and they were buzzing about the engagement. Liz made a wide circle around that, as she would a hornet's nest. She knew she should congratulate her cousin on her engagement, but she just wasn't in the mood. At least Finn wasn't with Juliana, a small blessing. But Juliana saw her and turned away from her friends.
Alyssa, wait, let me see.
So Liz had to stop and turn and show off her dress with the tiny mincing steps that were all she could manage. Her cousin wore a long, sinuous dress in a smoky purple, a flatland lily in her midnight hair. It was no wonder Finn was smitten with her.
You look lovely, Alyssa,
Juliana said, gracious as always.
I'm so glad to see that dress put to good use. Mother insists on keeping them, but she never wears them.